Okay, everybody, 7:16. I'm now calling the Sherborn Conservation Commission meeting of February 16th to order. We'll do a roll call vote, so to speak, and Michael Lesser, I can't tell. Do you think I should announce your names or everybody should announce themselves?
I think it's more orderly when you call on people.
Oh, you guys behave better. Oh, okay. Jacob?
Aye, present. Jacob
Steve?
Strauss.
You got to work on your muting skills, unmuting skills.
Steve, yes, I'm present.
Okay, Kurt,
Present.
Courtney,
Present and accounted for.
there you go. Carol,
Present.
Matt,
Present.
we're all present. Okay. Anything under the 48-hour rule, anything we need to add to the agenda or consider adding to the agenda?
Michael, I did want to see if we can have a brief discussion about a change to the zoning bylaw that impacts the power line corridors in town that I guess was submitted to us on the 30th for our review. And I just want to make sure that we at least have a brief discussion and figure out when planning board needs input from us about the habitat there under the power lines. I didn't find out about that till this week because I heard about it and reached out directly to Gino. But
Right.
he told me that it was sent to us on the 30th.
Yeah, I guess I didn't register it, actually. It's a Concom thing for some reason. Yes, just so everybody knows, the planning board will be discussing comments on it on next Tuesday, the 21st. So if people want to comment on that, I guess,
Oh, is this the solar?
yeah, it's the large scale ground mounted solar.
Yeah, and I actually put together a letter just for me personally, because we don't have a chance to, but there's the habitat values. It's a really, really valuable habitat, that shrubland habitat. And I think Concom is probably the only body in town that can advise on that. But I have put together some information, including input from Ted Elliman. I've reached out to Mass Audubon, who I know has conducted, various classes and, walks there. I think it's just.
Hold on, before we go any further, I'm just trying to decide, I guess, given that they have a hearing, I guess we should talk about it. I guess I'll move that, right, that we didn't get this order yet. I'll move to add that to the agenda under discussions.
Second.
Solar warrant, yeah. Okay, first and second, any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Jacob,
Aye.
Michael, I, Steve,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
Courtney,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Carol.
Aye.
Okay, we'll put that under the agenda there. Okay, other than that, we have 10 minutes before our for the hearing for Ash Lane. In terms of issues, do we have an annual report draft?
We do.
Where is it? I didn't see it on my.
I forgot to move it into the the meeting folder, it's. Hold on, let me go back here. I'll just stick it in the conservation meeting folder real quick.
Alright.
Well, if you go to the top level, documents, there's a annual report folder and it's sitting in there.
Okay,
If that's faster. Then
let's see, let's pull that one up since you can see, share, okay.
it's pretty
So
rough.
this is in the, oops. This is in the documents. It's an annual, oh, there it is.
Yep.
Sorry, there is a problem. Let's see. I'm getting that there's a problem opening it. Oh, no, now it's opened. Okay, let's see, how long is this thing? I guess we're gonna do it the long-handed way. Since nobody has seen this, except for Courtney and maybe Joyce. Why don't we start reading this since it's due? It was due on Monday. So we have to get something in this week, basically. So let's read through this thing here. People let me know when they've gone through it, if they have any comments. Whoops.
A lot of this is just the same as the previous one. And I just tried to update it for last year. And there's definitely at least one spot where I couldn't find the information and I thought maybe somebody else would remember.
Well, we'll see. Okay, everybody, start reading. We've got to get through this, unfortunately, this way.
I wanted to suggest a wording change where it says wetlands regulation. I would suggest just simplifying it to say it's kind of just describing how RDAs work, but I think that if we can just say the commission can
I
proceed,
don't know where you're talking.
wetlands regulation, and then it says during 2022, the commission, and it's the first bullet. And in the fourth line, it says the commission can proceed with more limited conditions in order to avoid adverse wetland impacts and without a more detailed order of conditions. I think that's kind of going to be confusing to anybody outside of the commission. So I would suggest simplifying it to say can proceed with limited conditions that avoid adverse wetland impacts or something along those lines.
I'm just trying to read it to see.
The other thing is the RDAs don't necessarily lead to limited conditions. So the other possibility is how the commission, how activities can, within jurisdiction of the commission can proceed while avoiding adverse wetland impacts is really what we're looking at.
Okay, I'm reading. I can't react until I read it without.
Yep.
I think it's just trying to say that it's a limited application as opposed to a notice of intent.
Yeah, but an RDA comes before, an RDA comes before us for lots of things, right? it's the request for determination of applicability. It's basically, you know, does it apply? I don't know. I'm interested in what other people say about this.
I guess it just describes what an RDA is for me.
I wouldn't mind simplifying that sentence because it's got the whether how structure is confusing.
Okay,
I will just throw out there that I did not edit this section at all, except I think Joyce stuck in the like new numbers, maybe, like.
all right, you don't have to defend it. We're not.
I'm not, I'm just saying, this is what we sent
No,
last.
no,
So-
that's me, that's me. So I
So if
just,
you want to change it,
it
like,
should be it could be a request for determination of applicability instead of request for determination.
Right. Yeah, I know, that's what, right, whether. But these are how many RDAs were reviewed,
Correct.
even if they led to an NOI or who knows what.
Right, which is why I was suggesting that we simplify the wording.
And I just, okay. Sorry. So, okay, so the wording here in order to. So what was Jacob or Carol, what were you suggesting? I'm struggling to figure out while I'm reading this thing, what to reword this to. Within the jurisdiction. I described that are within the jurisdiction.
I mean, we could use what's actually in our regulations, which is the purpose of the request for the RDA is to allow the commission to determine whether the proposed project will alter an area subject to protection under the Sherborn bylaw. And then it goes such that the filing of a notice of intent will be required. I mean, that's basically what an RDA is, according
I
to.
know, but it doesn't, but in actuality, it does. Yeah, I see that, but on the other hand, we're still saying it's in jurisdiction. I guess I would prefer modifying this to reducing it to that. So.
Basically to determine whether it's in the wetland jurisdiction. I'm fine with that, making it that simple.
Determine whether it's in jurisdiction.
Yeah,
But everything in an RDA that is in jurisdiction, just a matter of whether they have to proceed.
Not
So,
necessarily. I mean, that's not known until
right,
after.
well, it's generally known because we have administrative approvals. Even though formally it's done. We're gonna have to stop this and come back to this. In 30 seconds. Well, we're gonna come back to this. Let's go through there and we'll revisit it later. And we could see how we're feeling later and whether we will vote to approve it, assuming that we clean this up. We have to get through the rest of it too. People have any more comments on this page besides this part here?
I'm curious what the brackets are for in that fifth bullet.
Yeah, I don't know why there are any brackets. We should get rid of all the brackets in all the bullets. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm just seeing brackets around the word wetland in
Oh.
the fifth bullet.
Oh, yeah. I think that's, yeah, I don't see, yeah, okay. I was gonna suggest we get rid of all of the,
Yeah, the parentheses,
Well-
I don't
Yeah.
feel strongly one way or the other, but I just
no,
wasn't
no, I
sure what
agree
the
with you.
brackets
Yeah,
were.
no,
So you can just eliminate the word wetland because it's a order of resource area delineation. It's not a wetland. Just take out the word wetland.
you should make order a plural. Orders.
Orders of conditions.
All over the place.
So we didn't do any enforcement actions. Yes, we,
Doesn't even seem possible.
doesn't seem possible, but, okay, we'll clean this up. Okay, let's come back, 7:31. Okay, everybody, we will return to this. Let me stop the share. Okay. Conservation Commission, Town of Sherborn. Notice hereby given that the Conservation Commission of the Town of Sherborn will hold a virtual public hearing at 7:30 on the 16th day of February. The RDA hearing will be held pursuant to Chapter 131, Section 40 of the General Laws as amended, Wetlands Protection Act, and the Sherborn Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 17, to consider a proposal by the owner, James, sorry if I get this mispronounced, Siswerda, for soil testing of a failed septic system at 22 Ash Lane, map 8, lot 45. This application is available for viewing at the Sherborn Conservation Commission office. All persons desiring to be held will be given the opportunity to speak at this hearing. Okay. The hearing is up. I guess who do we have representing, or who's presenting this?
We have Karen.
Okay.
Civilized Solutions.
Mhm.
So this is basically just a RDA to do soil testings for, as you said, a failed system. The testing is all outside the 50-foot buffer. No trees are going to be removed. The testing is going to be done in the general area of the existing system. And this cannot be placed on the other side of the house because of a well. Oh, thank you, Joyce.
Well, there's the well thing. These are the 3 test pits.
Yes,
They're in the 50 to 100, and there's wetlands coming from both the left and the right.
exactly. Yes.
And that's existing lawn, basically.
Existing lawn, yes.
Okay. Do we, let's see.
And the area next to it, to the right of it, is as a kind of a mounded area. So it goes up and then go back down, and goes back down on the other side.
Okay. Joyce, do you have any comments to make about this?
No, it's very straightforward. This is the only place they can test, and it's, they'll have to come back with a notice of intent, but, this is fine.
What conditions do we have?
I prepared a, thing. If you want, I can, just wanna
Oops.
close your.
Okay, fine. I was just gonna go pull it out.
Meeting, yeah.
What's that?
If you go into the meeting file, I prepared a, go up to the DOA.
Oh, yeah, fine. I didn't go look at that, special conditions. Okay, no trees, restoration. So we don't need any erosion
No.
control.
No, no,
It's just flat enough.
yep, and they'll just cover it over, they'll just smooth it out when it's finished and.
Okay. Okay, anybody else from the commission have any questions about this and the conditions?
No.
Okay. I move that, I move for a termination of a -3, meaning that there's not going to be impacts on the wetlands if performed according to the conditions that we're describing here. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Roll call vote. Michael, I. Jacob,
Aye.
Steve, yeah.
Aye.
Okay, Kurt,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Courtney,
Aye.
Carol.
I,
Okay,
Great.
Ashley, go forth and test, as we say.
So I'll send an email out to the Board of Health that we approved it at tonight's meeting. It will be signed sometime between now and next week. And then we'll get the formal report out.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you,
Have a
Karen.
good night.
Yep, you
Night.
too.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Going back to, I think I'm gonna go back to the screen annual report for 4 minutes. I think we have 4 minutes. So we still have the thing above. Let me keep, let me see, I'll clean up all the parentheses. Any other comments?
Should we be mentioning the, oh, it is in there, never mind. That was the DPW, help with some of the reservations, but it's in the 3rd paragraph.
I guess I can't tell. Do we need this in response to COVID?
Well, we just kind of updated that, that it's continuing and that we still are having remote meetings.
I guess.
We're
I
definitely
would be-
not gonna write it again next year.
Well, I'd be fine with dropping that whole paragraph. It's
Sure.
unnecessary.
Yeah.
Anybody want to defend keeping it in there? Oops.
No, everybody else has decided the pandemic's over, so we're good. And we may not be virtual for much longer.
We'll find out. Yeah.
Courtney, it looks like there was a question here about what the new signs were for in the 2nd paragraph under Barber and other reservations, and it talks about the Land Management Task Force. Those were new signs for, you could just say various conservation lands, but specifically it was
Leland was
Mill
one of the-
Pond,
Pond.
Leland, yep. Who else besides that? I think
Did I just say several of our properties?
I would say that, yes. Well, a few of our properties, but yeah.
Well, we
Just
how
say-
many?
Just say
Three?
various properties. We were just finding the ones that were old and replacing them.
Okay. Various.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any new bridges infrastructure? I don't know if we did. Down here.
I just legit couldn't remember because I remember bridges and I'm like, was that last year? Was that the year?
No, not
before?
this year, but no, there was the parking lot, that's all.
Oh, yeah, that for, yeah. On Main Street.
Okay.
I did not touch this section at all, so.
Okay.
the master plan, I was just like,
I don't think we've done anything with that. Yeah, we just drop all this. I don't remember us having time to discuss any of this.
No, but I didn't know how to, yeah, because I don't remember a lot of this, but we also should mention the tree bylaw. The tree,
oh, yes.
the tree,
Okay, we're gonna come back to this.
Policy.
Yeah, not the permitting process.
tree,
Yes,
thank you, tree policy.
more
Okay,
efficient. now.
fine. Okay, gotta move on. Because I think it's at 7:40, was it? Okay.
Yep. 7:40.
Notice hereby given that the Conservation Commission of the Town of Sherborn will hold a virtual public hearing at 7:40 on the 16th day of February. The request is to amend an existing order of conditions here pursuant to Chapter 131, Section 40 of the General Laws as amended, the Wetlands Protection Act, and the Sherborn Wetlands Bylaw, Chapter 17, to consider a proposal by the owners considered by the proposal by the owners. This application is available for viewing at the Conservation Commission. All persons designed to be heard will be given notice to speak at this hearing. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing unless who's here on behalf of this project?
Dushan Wang from Creative Land and Water Engineering. Can you
Okay.
all hear me?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. I'm running some issues with my Zoom recently, so I just want to make sure. So the new owner is Lee Cavallo. So he's also at the meeting right now. I talked to Joyce briefly today. So I did an overlay plan. So if you don't mind, because it's a very short time, I haven't get to submit to the commission. So I will share the screen so we can see the request amendment compare with the approved plan. So it's easier for the commission to see it.
Sure.
So, yeah, just a second. Okay, so first let me zoom it in. We submit the first page. So, and since Joyce was not involved in the project in the previous approval, so we didn't submit the second page of the plan because we didn't change anything in the tree mitigation area, but we will submit it just for completeness. So if you're looking, I'm trying to zoom it in. So the driveway stay the same. This is overlay. The red line is the approved house from here, and then the driveway and the gradings. So the proposed is the black line. So it's basically the difference in the buffer zone is about 304 square feet. So this green area was the previously, was originally approved the plan with that area inside the 100-foot buffer zone. And the red line is the current house, which the new owner wants to build. So if you look in, zoom in a little bit, this is a 50-foot no disturb zone. And this green line is a 100-foot buffer zone. So if you're looking at it, that's the only thing change pretty much, and some gradings. We did some more retaining wall to raise the grades flatter around the house. So because the height of the house concern, so we made it flatter compared with before. So before the runoff is more shooting to the wetlands more directly. Right now, it's more leveled, so the water will go more or less away from the buffer zone, but still close to it. So the rest of it is the changes outside of 100-foot buffer zone, but I would like to go over with it. Oops, sorry.
Shang, may
Yeah.
I ask you a question? When you
Yeah.
just talked about those retaining walls, was that in the original approved order of conditions, those retaining walls?
No, there was originally retaining wall. You see the red one is here, but the retaining wall was extended a little bit longer to making the flat grades. There
How
was a
how many feet are you proposing should be added? Or how many feet was the original retaining wall and how many feet are you proposing to add?
I did measure. I can let me see if I can give you that number. If I can finish it, so for the overall presentation, maybe we can come back to this issue. What do you think?
Sure.
Otherwise, we are piecemeal.
I'd like to hear all the changes.
Numbers.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we
Number.
are we get that we are losing the overall issue. So I definitely will come back to it. So so the other changes is more if you're looking at it, originally the driveway going in straight to the garage, given Maple Street is relatively busy. So the new owner moved away the driveway curving to the side of it. So, which is, again, it's outside of the 100-foot buffer zone. We do, because of the increased impervious area, we add an infiltration apron trench 2 by 2 by 2 around the edge of the driveway, and also added a stormwater management little basin to integrate to the original approved one. Then additionally, at the end of it, we also created a little basin. So if all the runoff come into the infiltration trench, if excessive runoff will coming down to further treated and detained. So we did the calculation. So the stormwater is not going to cause any, there will be no net change. So it's all meet. So there's no change in the leaching field, the septic systems. The grading around the house is it's very minimal change. So it's probably within 6 inches. So from 200 to 200.33. So compared with the original. So that's a total change. But again, I want to go to planting plan. This planting plan is remain the same because all the plantings, as you can see, is in the buffer zone for the mitigation and beyond the limit of work, which is with the bonds in all the corners, which you can see the overlay is identical. There's no change at all. So therefore, any mitigation, all the mitigation approved remain the same. There's no change. The total area of disturbance, no change. The only change, as you noticed, I'm going to go back to the detailed grading plan, is this little about 300 square feet of roof area plus this retaining wall within the approved limit of work to making the gradings around the house a little bit flatter. So that's because of the height of the house. So that's if anything within the 100-foot buffer zone, that's the two changes. Then coming back to Carol's concern about the total length of the retaining wall, the difference, I did measure it, but I can measure it now. See if I can get it.
Shang, was there a retaining wall before? I didn't see it on the one that you just scrolled down to.
No, that one is because of its mitigation plan. That one we just
Okay.
put the house footprint. There's no grading plan on that. That's not, so the overlay is this red one. You can see the red line. That's a retaining wall. There's some repeat. The retaining wall originally coming here, coming to here. So there's not that much difference. So the added retaining wall is this section. And so this one is pretty much about the original retaining wall. I don't think we probably don't have an original. Let me see if I can find.
I don't think
my-
there was a retaining wall back there.
I don't remember a retaining wall.
Oh yeah, it's a walkout. There's a retaining wall there. So you probably just don't remember it. but let me see if I can bring up.
If you
That's
could
a
show
tree.
the approved plan, that would be probably helpful, because it would.
Yeah,
shed some
that's
light
what
on
I'm
that.
trying to, I'm going to, why we did overlay, you see that red line, but I'm trying to see if I can get the original plan up.
Okay, so we have the retaining wall and some change, all the change in grading around the retaining wall. We have an increase of the building in the unaltered buffer zone from 600 to 900 feet, roughly.
Right.
Um,
So see the retaining wall? That's approved plan.
So it was only there on the right, or what's that on the left? That doesn't look like a retaining wall on the left.
Just the dry well. So the retaining wall on the other side is new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So before here is just a graded in, but with the new plan, we did propose a retaining wall on this side. As said, given the height of the house, we have a little bit of issue. We're trying to raising up the grades around the house as much as we can, so to gain some height reduction. So that's the purpose of that for the side of it. Otherwise, they're going to slope down. And in Sherborn, you counted each side of the house is the lowest point. It's a calculation. So even though we are pretty high here, but here is low, then you have to use the low grades, So that's why we added that to meet the height challenge for the house. But nevertheless, the retaining wall is still within the approved limit of work, and the raising making the land flatter, I don't see any negative impact. It's actually probably help a little bit that the water, slow down the water and promote infiltration, or recharge. So I don't really see making the flatter around the house is by the retaining wall is a significant change. But so that's just my opinion. So yeah, I think that's pretty much covers what we had to say. So, and I will answer any questions. So from this point, more close to the buffer zone, no change at all. So as you can see, the septic systems are the
And there's
same.
there's no other buffer zone to the left there. I guess that's the edge of the buffer zone. I see.
Yeah,
it. Okay, there it is.
yeah, that's a
Okay,
buffer zone.
okay. Before I go, Joyce, do you have anything to comment on this?
I don't at this point, no.
Commissioners ask questions before, I'll wait.
Well, no, go ahead.
For the portion of the house that's within the 100-foot zone, which way is it sloped, and where does the water drain off of from the roof?
Yeah, the roof is going for this section will be piped into the dry well. We connect to the dry well.
Okay.
Have you changed
then-
the dry well?
Yeah, there's no change because the only small section of over here is going to there. The rest of it is going to the exfiltration, infiltration trenches coming this way. Most of them is coming away from the buffer zone, going away from it. The majority of the stormwater management you can see is pretty much follow the entire perimeter of the south and I think the south edge.
So you weren't infiltrating the front portion of the roof?
Yeah, portion of the roof. Actually, most of them will probably contained by as we calculated. You can see it's pretty long. It's over 130 feet, 120, 130 feet of 2x2 stone trench coming down, and all the water coming down here. There's also a small detention basin, and then there's the hole around this is a detention basin. Only overflow will go into the wetlands is from here through the riser pipe. So which in the detail, you can see there's a riser So it's very we expect the soils are Class B soils, it's very permeable. We don't really expect any under the less than 10-year storm, there shall be no overflow at all. So based on our analysis.
Shang, so you're increasing the impermeable surfaces by about a third, is that right? From 600 to 900 feet, or you're basically adding 300 square feet of impermeable surface?
Yes, yes, yeah, but it will be recharged and is take care by increase the stormwater management area on the side. Before it's only in the front part. Before the only stormwater management is a little area, but you can see we added over here and added a stone trench around the entire length of the new driveway, plus a small basin at the toe of slope. So if you can see any disturbed land from this change, it's much more compensated than before.
Well, that's the one thing I was wondering is by moving the driveway, does that offset the additional 300 square feet? Or was that already out of jurisdiction?
Yeah, it's
on your-
already out of the jurisdiction. All the driveways originally is outside of the buffer zone.
Because when you came before us before, the reason that you did all the mitigation was because you were creating disturbance in completely undisturbed buffer, 100-foot buffer, which our local regulations protects. And so I'm not hearing you offer any additional mitigation for the 300 square feet that you're proposing to add.
Well, this is already within the permitted disturbance area. The only thing is the runoff difference. The runoff mitigation, we did provide more stormwater management. Okay,
You're
so we
adding
are not
impervious
proposing
area.
new disturbance.
Yeah,
So
it's the
your
same disturbance
rationale is
area, but this
still
is
in.
more impervious area you've added.
Right, the more impervious area was compensated by this additional stormwater management facility we added to it.
That doesn't do anything to take, replace that buffer zone that you're gonna be, lawn is still a step better than impervious area.
Well, from the stormwater runoff perspective, that's basically, as far as I understand, and a common practice is to offset the runoff, which we did. And I don't know in the bylaw in people's backyard disturbed area if they have to put a shed. What you do. So it's just 300 square feet. It's like in a small shed. So I don't think from my experience and career, I don't see if in the backyard, in the buffer zone, people put a shed, you will require any mitigation to do. But for us, we did provide the mitigation for stormwater, and we expanded it to cover the additional stormwater roof surface. So I agree with you. There's some difference, but so it's up to the commission judgment call to under your regulation clause if our proposed mitigation is adequate and properly done. But if it's not, we are here to. That's why we have this hearing. We are here to listen to you.
Just so you know, we do require some mitigation or other things if they were doing a shed. So that was, if I heard you correctly, I would disagree with that.
Yeah,
statement.
yeah,
Okay,
okay.
so,
What kind of
let's-
mitigation
And
required?
stormwater isn't the only issue, only interest that's affected by.
If
by
you're not cutting any more
building.
trees, what is the mitigation requirement? I would like to know.
Deshang, did you consider avoidance altogether of instead of adding on in buffer, adding on the other side of the house?
I think we did. So the owners here, we probably went through, I don't know how many possible house plan, they originally want to put the house all the way to the edge of the approved mitigation area, and we cut it down at least 10 feet or more. So in order to fit their house or the owner's goal for their house, dream house in town. I mean, everybody have their. We are here trying to balance their needs as well as the understanding of the Wetlands Protection Bylaw and under the Wetlands Protection Act. So what we can do the best. So we believe for a single family house, putting up tremendous mitigation around the edge of it within the buffer zone, where we know we did more 2-to-1. I have to dig in more than 2-to-1 tree plantings, and the stormwater technically was exempted, but we did provide to meet to the full scale as a single family house. So it's from, again, that's just my experience and my professional opinion with this kind of situation. The change compared with the previously approved plan in the buffer zone, it's really mitigated. So, but so that's just my understanding, and we are here to listen to the board, to your opinions and what you can think.
Can you scroll this a little so that we could see a little bit more where the no. You can zoom in. I just wanted to see where the stormwater thing was. Zoom it. Oops.
You want to see
Scroll it
which
so that we could see all of the where the stormwater thing there was.
So
No, the
so
other
from
way,
the
the other way,
beginning,
not that stormwater. Go back. It's the dry well. The dry well. I wanted to see that
yeah,
area.
the dry well is they're basically
Okay, you can
taking
stop
care-
here. That's just fine.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So
So all the roof will come into here, and then in the buffer zone, or more than the buffer zone area technically, so can handle. So we put it in there, and the rest of it will drain toward the other side of
that
it.
wasn't the issue. I just wanted to see that area because
That didn't
before I make a
change.
comment, I wanted to know if anybody else on the commission. If Jacob, Steve, Kurt, Matt, anybody else want to comment first?
Well, I'm wondering whether the area that's between the new retaining wall and the limit of lawn, if that should actually be lawn or if that should be shrubs or something of that form, that better buffer zone than lawn.
So you're talking about here?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Sort of, that would be-
originally
that would
approved
be a
as a
place to
limit of
expand
lawn.
mitigation area.
The mitigation areas beyond this bond, if you remember. That's all a permanent bond. We
Well,
don't.
you're reopening the door by, unfortunately, by doing more impervious in house there, which was a controversial topic at the time. This is opening the door to some additional request for mitigation for this change. So there's a little bit of a negotiation possibly going on here, which I'll just say that. Just because that's what we had it last time doesn't mean that that still holds with the current change. Because as before, we were quite resistant to having house in this unaltered outer buffer. It was pulled back, and it was pulled back as part of this negotiation. And so therefore, the door is opened again to whether with this change to whether some additional mitigation might be appropriate. So therefore what Jacob is bringing up is part of that. It's not just because we had it before, it doesn't hold as an argument.
Yeah, okay, no, I understand. So as one thing I may point it out too is if you look in the original plan, there's a walkway entrance is inside the buffer zone for the new one. So this area will be pretty much just a lawn or probably landscaping planted, so there's no more entrance in the zone. The entrance and the walkway was all brought out of the buffer zone. So I mean, that's just since we are looking at every little bit. So I just want to
Sure,
point out.
there's
this
another 100
little-
square feet. There's a little bit of a difference there or less, but okay, that's
Yeah,
something to be
yeah,
said.
that's a still, I mean, if we
But
are looking at.
Coming back to
little one.
Jacob, why don't you continue, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Jacob, you can continue.
Yeah, we only have a few feet of access around the side of it, so.
So
I'm-
people want access around there as opposed to just bringing what Jacob said up to the retaining wall, which would be a nice sort of buffer zone addition.
Right, I wonder if that would actually work as maybe a garden path with shrubs, which sort of just, so you could still have access around there, but it would be more effective buffer zone.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I would add to that to say, Deshang, you know, as Michael pointed out, when we discussed this was undisturbed buffer zone. We really talked hard about this idea of disturbing in the 51 to 100, especially considering that it was absolutely undisturbed. And I think the entire 300 square feet needs to be mitigated or else, you know, avoid. So, you know, figure out a way to move the house further out of the 100. I don't think it's that difficult of a choice to do that. And that's certainly what the regulations recommend, is to start with avoidance.
Carol, I definitely respect that the way you think. So we do have a very tight site. You may not think in that way because of the septic system. Joyce knows we have to fulfill minimum setback from the leaching field. This is the only area we can fit the septic, as you know, as approved. And I don't mind talking to my clients to see how we can provide in this mitigation for the additional impervious in previously approved limit of work. Okay, we cannot take it out of context of the previously approved, because it appears approved for disturbance. Right now, it's just that little surface change. This is not talking about we are intruding into
I will
unpermitted
interrupt
area.
Now,
Okay, so there's a difference in my view. So
But there's
Right,
another
that's-
300 square feet.
right, but it's within the approved disturbance area, and which we mitigated for the trees cut.
But this
Okay.
is, you've now changed it. And so if you don't want to do additional mitigation, you're more than welcome to build what was originally approved. But like the commission is telling you that we're not considering the stormwater as enough, considering how much you're adding impervious area. So it's a different thing now.
let me,
Yeah, move on.
Maria,
That's what we are listening to.
before
We are
you
trying to
respond to
listen
that, Deshang-
more specific recommendation, what you would
Are you willing-
require. Otherwise, we will not go anywhere. So whether we need or we don't need, we provided and you don't think is enough.
Okay,
I'd
you
like
could,
to hear what
could
you
I
want.
interrupt you? Please stop. I guess for both the commission, and I don't know, for us to think about, as well as to Shang and Lee, whether don't zoom in so much, keep it there. Whether there's some area, let's say the 300 square feet, I'm just gonna throw out an idea for everybody to think about on all sides. Of maybe it's a little less because there's less entryway or something like that. But whether there could be a little bit less lawn back in the corner where the dry well is. Maybe you still, I mean, I still like Jacob's idea too of that path around the wall there, whether it's less lawn and more vegetated, where there's still a path, but if people want that kind of passageway that's clearer, whether some few hundred square feet back of lawn in that little rectangular area there, where after you put in the dry well, whether that could be restored to a more natural buffer, that there's some cutting off there, that there's some area there that could be converted back from being lawn to, yeah, something in that, something there that of some equivalent square feet that could be then returned to natural buffer as a possible compromise here.
I would ask also, I think that the suggestion of, the area of the buffer that's outside of those retaining walls, how tall are those retaining walls going to be? Because they may, prevent wildlife passage, especially smaller wildlife. So I could see the idea of having everything outside of that area also return to kind of wetland shrubs or just shrubs to add to the buffer. And I'm sure there's many ways that could be landscaped to make it beautiful, but the point is that, otherwise we have the addition of the disturbance of these retaining walls.
How high are the retaining walls?
6 feet, probably around.
Okay.
Okay, so they really are substantial, and
Sure.
there's no way a smaller creature is going to easily get over those.
Yeah, we're trying to deal with the wildlife habitat. The question is there something here for you, for Lee and Deshang, or whether there's some area, some of that area along that retaining wall or in that back corner where you drew something of some maybe close to 300 square feet that could be returned to a more natural buffer. I personally could see the area back there. I don't know. I guess I would be flexible as to how much I push for that area by
So
the
this
retaining
is-
wall, because I know people might want to have access to go around there in some easy way, but I'm not sure what it is that would work best. But I don't know whether there's something there that that I think would be at least workable for me in this case here, since this is a tricky project for us. Given
And
the
Shang, I think we'd want to know how many square feet that could all add up to, like how, see how close you can get to 300 square feet and where.
or the 270, if we give you credit for the walkway.
Yep.
But question is whether that's a way to go get through this. And whether that works for the homeowner. As
Hey,
well
so
as
can you
people
guys
on the
hear me?
board. Hi.
Hi, I'm the homeowner.
right, sure.
I'm trying to, yeah, I'm trying my best to follow all this. I'm obviously not an engineer. I work in technology, so I'm trying to just make sure I grasp what the suggestion is. It sounds like it's just to bring the limit of lawn up right towards the wall and add some trees to just add some type of vegetative separation. Is that what I'm gathering? So
Make a
really
more
it's-
natural buffer, right? The goal is here.
Yeah.
The buffer
I'm
zone.
sure.
The buffer zone is critical for just, and it's in a certain
Totally.
state of vegetation. So
Yeah.
I don't know
try to
that it's-
create that.
I don't know that it's
So-
necessarily trees, because you certainly don't want trees right up against your house, but
Shrub, yeah, I mean,
shrubs.
as
but
I
shrubs
said, I'm
versus
not-
lawn would be a big difference.
That's, yeah, sure. As I said, this is outside my expertise. So trees, shrubs, to me, they're the same. I get they're not to you, but just, that's why I said trees. So to me, that's a small compromise. I would just need to understand from Deshang's perspective, really bringing that up, adding shrubs, does that really impact anything beyond just, because that's not really an area that would be accessed anyways by my family, right? Like it's outside of really where anyone would be operating. So I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
the
no,
impact.
something like that, we could, right. I mean, to the extent that you, as Carol said, that some of that area could be brought up to the retaining wall and left, that we could leave it more natural. Then, I mean, to some extent, we're trying to get a choice of basically pulling back the lawn on that side of the house of some, let's say, 250 square feet or something like that. He's trying to do the 71, but whatever, roughly, I'll just say 250 or so. that basically brings in essence, the limit of work. It would be, the limit of work is further, but basically the restaurant, basically trying to keep that natural in the end product somewhere along there would, I think, be workable for both sides, I'm gathering. Is that what the commission is?
I mean, yeah, if it's, I mean, as I said, I need to understand impact. If it's just, you know, more so on a visual basis, because that's not truly like some area that would be accessed. But I know that, right, there is an agreed plan to, I think it's like 50 or so trees, right? So there are above the limit of lawn quite a few.
Yeah, no, there would be just
plantings that will go
supplementing
in.
it. It would be supplementing it so that additional
Sure.
area.
Yeah, I'm
would
just
be-
wondering,
we
like-
could work on that together. We could sort that out together. I just want to get a framework for something here that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's possible. It's just, and it seems fair to me. It's just, I'm wondering if it's you know, overkill with the amount of trees that are already going in, right? Like, is
Well,
it
it's more
is it truly
vegetation,
gonna-
as Jacob said. It's
Sure.
it's a vegetative. It's the issue of the type of vegetation, which, and the type of ground cover, and that at the ground as well as at a shrub or higher level, where you basically get better values for what the wetlands do in terms of infiltration of water, preventing of pollution, habitat for animals. It's that kind of structure that we're trying to create here that we could work together to create. But it sounds like we might have something that we could work on to just sort of come up with an area there and what will be put in that area, just to extend the whole mitigation and amend the order to include this additional mitigation if we're going to approve this extension of the house. But before I go there, what do people on the commission feel about this, where we're going here?
So
Joyce?
I just wanted to, I neglect to ask Deshang at the beginning of the meeting. Deshang, do you have the green cards? You did not.
I think they
drop
were in the
those off
phone.
at the office.
Well, we emailed in, and I don't think we have the all the green cards. So, well, yeah, I probably have it here. Just a
So
second.
the only
Maybe
thing we
haven't
have in
scanned
the
it. I
folder
probably
are,
haven't scanned it in. Just a second.
Oh,
we only have the certified mail receipts. We do not
I-
have green cards right now.
Yeah, the receipt shows that we did a green card with the return. I will scan it in, so you see here. I will scan it and email back to you. So
Well,
you
we-
can see. You can
well,
see
we're
the
not going to
receipt.
close the hearing tonight anyway.
Right, but we
Unless we
don't
made a
typically
mistake.
go
Yeah.
into discussions
Right.
until we have all the green
We're gonna
card.
have to-
Yeah, I mean, I show you here. We have, since it's not in person, I have it with me. So I'm not just saying we don't have it. So I'm showing you here, you can see. And also from the receipt, we already scanned, and the email to you shows that we paid all the return receipt.
No, but payment, we need the receipt to show that the attempted delivery was made and that they received it, or that the mail person made their 3 attempts or whatever, and it came back undeliverable. The
Yeah,
receipt
I have it.
was-
Just reach out to me here.
I think that's what he's saying. He has it, right? If it was in
Yeah,
person,
but
he could.
I mean, this is a legal thing in our regulations. We need to validate that, because if the abutters aren't properly notified that this is going on, it's an issue.
Yeah, I apologize. I have
It's
it. I
not just
should have
our level,
scanned
it's a
and
state
emailed you.
level. Okay,
Sure.
you'll send it to us tonight.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
I will have a carrier.
No, you'll hopefully you can scan it and. email
Hopefully you
and send it
can
to
take
us.
a picture with your phone and email it, anything.
Yeah, I will scan it. I will scan and email a PDF file, rather than give you 6 of.
Okay, since we're gonna, let's see, so going back to the commission. Whether Joyce or any of us want to work with them to see whether we can come up with this, a sort of an extended mitigation. Is this something that makes sense for us to work on getting at least the equivalent amount of lawn reduction with appropriate vegetation to make it a good buffer zone quality? of at least this extent, of at least equal to whatever this changes here. This is something I can live with. I'd like to get at least a 300. I mean, this sort of 250, 300 and have a clear, we would move in some of the markers and things like that. And I understand that to the extent that some of it takes place with the I mean, it'd be nicer to have it along the a lot of this along the retaining wall, because that's actually closer, a little bit closer into the wetlands. So we value that proximity is an issue.
Yeah, the one thing I would comment for, I guess for Lee's benefit is that, this is a very tight situation when it first came before us, because our bylaw and our regulations protect the first 100 feet so that the habitat is there, and that's considered part of the functioning of the wetlands. So anything you can do to kind of reproduce that habitat, which is what we're talking about. For instance, if you added a bunch of shrubs, a bunch of native shrubs, and the leaves fall down, it creates leaf litter. That's where the little critters from the wetlands go during the summer. So just so you understand why it's so important to have the functioning of the adjacent 100 feet, that as much as you can provide, that makes us feel more comfortable that we're not having a negative impact on the wetlands. Is that helpful, Lee, to hear?
Yeah,
that?
no, totally. I mean, that's one of the drivers to want to live in this town, is the work that's done to preserve the nature and habitat that surrounds it.
Exactly, and that's
That's
great.
just the attitude we like to hear. Welcome to town.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, planting shrubbery along the limit of the lawn, right, is probably the most preferred scenario, right, to have that little extra siding to just have access and be able to service the house if I need to, or it's helpful, right? It's not a ton of space. Bringing it up to the retaining wall is not by any stretch of the word something that I think is unreasonable, but obviously the preferred method would be to bring in some more shrubs around the limit, keep that extra space just from a servicing perspective. And I mean, it's not anything that's going to be actively used, but it's always good to be able to access the side of your house if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, you could bring it along, right? You could try to keep at least a 10 or 5 or 10 foot access point there, and whether that limit of lawn just comes in just a little bit there, and most of the compensation is more back where the dry well is. You could figure something out there, and we can move in the mounds, that the markers there.
If I may just comment on to follow up with Lee's, I think I like the idea the commission recommending, like Jacob, to making that area probably at this stage to become fertilizer free, just shrubby ground cover, but you don't need to mow it. But on the other hand, I can reconcile the needs for future. If you need the siding, need to painting or repair, if you're setting the limit of
you could
disturb it
have
right against the retaining wall, then you cannot go and doing anything, even though they
you might not have shrubs. You might come forth with some lower ground cover that's
right. That's
even
what
if it's mowed once a little bit.
Right, you
but,
don't need to mow it, and it's not going to really impact the house. So it's only 6 feet. We technically only have 6 foot access around there. So it's not like in the hell a lot of space we can cut it off. But by planting it to the way that we don't have to go there to mow it, every week, it's going to provide a much better habitat, as Carol commented. The creatures can come, will not get disturbed. It's only once a while if you need it. So you need to replace the window shed or paint it.
I think we're all on the same page. You have to come up with a plan. You can maybe talk with Joyce, or if it needs be, we can give you a little feedback.
Sure, yeah,
for
no,
the next
that's.
meeting, but I'm gonna suggest that, and don't cut it too close, since we've had trouble with this thing, the idea of exactly 309 minus 71.
No, I just want to get an idea. At
Don't,
this is-
because we're a little sensitive to the idea that this is unaltered buffer that's being converted. So do what you can to the best there.
Right,
And it'll protect everything. I think, I would like to suggest that maybe we, this is enough for tonight, and we could always give you feedback along the way via Joyce. That we'd like to continue the hearing to our next meeting. What makes sense? Or what do we have for the next meeting?
We have one new application, that will probably take about half an hour.
Okay, have we set
So
a
if we
time
put
for,
this
have we
on-
set a time for anything yet?
No, so we can set this one at 8 o'clock.
Sure. It's next time, okay, that should work.
What the
Um,
date?
This is be March 2nd.
Okay.
Right, March 2nd, the first, as we always do, we meet on the first and third Thursdays.
Right.
Okay. I
March
move,
2nd at 8 is the town caucus.
it's town caucus that night?
Yeah, March 2nd at 8.
It didn't take us into account?
Are we allowed to have a meeting that night?
I think we are allowed to, but
It's not an official government event, but,
is it an in-person or a virtual?
I'm pretty sure it's in person. So
Oh,
maybe you don't want to go.
well, that's kind of a drag. I don't know how many contentious things there are.
Sorry to derail your motion. I'm just thinking of the schedule for the next meeting.
Oh, God, the idea of actually trying to find another day.
Can we go the 9th and the 23rd?
Of February or March? I'm just curious.
March.
March.
Oh. Is that the soonest? I mean, because we're,
Is that a commission member asking that?
No, that's.
no, this is the homeowner. Yeah, I was just curious.
I'm sorry.
You were trying to sort this, because it would be the 9th, it would be a week later than our normal meeting because of this conflict.
Hmm.
That would give Desheng more time to prepare things, and then we'd have it well in advance of the meeting.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you said March 23rd, not.
Oh, no, we're talking about March 9th.
No, we're
Yeah.
talking about like our whole March
Yeah,
schedule.
right.
Sorry
So-
about
so
that.
March 9th.
Yeah,
would
I
be-
got that, yeah.
Yeah.
Just-
And you could go participate at the town caucus. if you have-
That's it. So we understand.
Michael, I'm not trying to prolong this discussion, but I am traveling that night and I will try and my flight lands at 7:30, so I would be participating in the meeting, but I would be late. So on the 3rd, so if you moved it to on the 2nd, so I'm all for moving it to the next week.
I think we are fine with the to the 9th, Lee. So let's do the.
Okay.
Yeah, the
how
9th
about
is
the rest-
fine.
I
The 9th is- the
really
9th
should-
is-
I really
How
should.
about the rest of the commission?
That is not good for me. In fact, it kind of screws me up with a handful of things because I just, I figured it was the 2, the 16, the 30, and I sort of arranged things around it.
Yeah, I understand.
You'll have a quorum without me anyway, but I'm a little hesitant to start moving the every other, thing just because, looking into April even, I've been scheduling stuff around that.
Oh, no, we wouldn't change anything else. This is the first time we've done it in a year or two. Let's put it that way. This is.
Well, I hope Lee feels honored here.
I do, thank you.
Well, probably
Probably
it's more a matter if we want to participate in this quirky political process called the town caucus, which I have some questions about anyway. But it is an annual ritual.
March.
that I that I do at least, and I don't know how many others. But besides you, Matt, Kurt or Steve or Jacob or Carol?
March
I'm
9th is okay
I'm
for
actually
me.
not available on the second at all, so
Okay,
I won't be here on the second.
fine. Carol and Jacob, is the 9th okay? 9th and
9th is
23rd?
okay with me.
Yeah, the
Okay.
9th works.
Oh,
The
fine,
9th.
That's good.
Then we will now move, okay,
Wait.
so we're gonna shift.
Did Carol say if it was okay?
Yeah, no, I think the 9th is okay. When is town caucus though?
Second.
The
The
second,
second at
Ah.
8.
that's why we're talking about this.
Yeah, no, I missed that part.
Okay.
The 9th is fine for me. Yes.
Fine, I move that we continue this hearing to March 9th at 8 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
Okay.
it. So yeah, you
Second.
accommodated that quickly, and hopefully you allow.
Hold on, it's a motion. What are you talking about? Hold on.
Second,
Quiet.
I second the motion.
Okay.
I seconded it.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, we're
fine.
good.
Any further discussion? No. Okay, roll call vote. Michael, I, Jacob, Kurt,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Courtney.
Bye.
Okay, see you in 3 weeks. And we'll hopefully get stuff well in advance so we can sort this out.
Yeah, we'll try, and hopefully
Okay.
we'll get you soon next week, and
Okay,
get a
fine.
feedback to us as soon as we
Sure.
can. But I will talk to Joyce to
It's-
just follow the
On that
recommendation.
note, I will cut you off because we're behind schedule.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. Nice to meet you, Lee. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Okay. I'm now opening up a hearing. Okay, notice is hereby given that the Conservation Commission will hold a virtual public hearing under its authority delegated by Mass General Law, Chapter 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act, and the Sherborn Wetlands Bylaw, using Zoom technology at 8:15, which is now going to be 8:33, on February 16th to discuss amending the Sherborn Wetland Regulations. This hearing will be the first of 2 separate hearings and will discuss possible amendments to all parts of the regulations in order to help draft specific changes. A second subsequent public hearing will be held after publication of specific proposed draft changes that will be available for public review at least 48 hours in advance of this second public hearing. At the second public hearing, all proposed amendments will be discussed prior to any commission voting. Okay. All persons desiring to be heard will begin the opportunity to speak at this hearing. Okay, so as you've heard, I followed this other route of opening up a public hearing for this, but breaking into 2 parts, as you just heard. Okay, so how do we, let's see, I see Matt. Hi, Matt.
Burn. Sorry, Madeline.
Yes, I will introduce who we have here as a guest here, who is, I guess, got some, oh, that's snow in the background. I couldn't tell that was water back there as a wetland. Matt Byrne is a consultant that we have under contract and did some work for us over about a year or so ago when we started thinking about the regulations. He was picked because we had done some work with him before, as well as the fact that he is one of few authors of the Massachusetts, the MACC guidebook on buffer zone issues. So we thought that that was particularly topical to have him help us with this process, because our main focus here is on the buffer zone regulations. And he also sits on, I think, if I gather right, you sit on your town's conservation commission, as
Yes,
well as he sits on the, I guess I didn't realize you now on the, maybe you've been for a while on the board of MACC. So we brought him here to help us in our process of trying to sort out how we're going to deal with the buffer zone regulations. He is the author of that document, #1 sign number 1 that is been around for a while in the folder there. That had various comments from others, but that was, he wrote there. So tonight we're going to try to sort out how we're going to view the buffer zone and any new amendments to our regulations with regard to performance standards for the buffer zone. Let's see now.
Michael, can I suggest that I share the document?
Or you can, I'll let you take it for now and see how this works with you and Matt with that document.
Okay, so basically our thinking was that Matt could kind of take the commission through this document, which is the same as what was in the drive, except that we've done a little bit of work on it to just, we've edited it for clarity. Because that it was originally a document that basically was based on some notes and an email to Jean Bednor, and I think both Jean and Michael had looked at it, but it was not all that ready for prime time. So Matt, would it be helpful if I just kind of worked through the beginning of this, and then when we get down to the area around bylaws, maybe you can take it from there?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Happy to kind of run this however you like.
Okay, so the only thing I'm gonna bring up here, and if it's probably in the folder now, it's 1A, edited for clarity, is the name of the document. And that the goals of what we asked Matt to do was help us to codify an expectation of avoidance of work within 100 feet of the wetlands in our regulations. Ultimately, we want to propose performance standards for work proposed within 100 feet, although we won't get into detail on that today. We want to figure out how we can require detailed evaluation and objective measures of the condition and functionality of the wetlands in the first 100 feet. Provide an objective mechanism for allowing work when appropriate, and require alternatives analyses when work meets a specific threshold of the extent of alterations. So I think this is just helpful for members of the commission to understand that these are some of the goals that we've kind of set in our own mind as we review the regulations this time around. This is kind of the second time we've done it. Previously, we looked more closely at the 0 to 50.
I
And
guess
then-
I'll just,
Carol-
let me just make one little comment that this is what we started about a year or so ago.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean that we're all limited to this. As people, this is a new commission, a lot of new members. So this is a path we started down before, but I do want to open the door to the fact that we might be thinking differently for some of us who were around then, as well as anybody new that that don't feel constrained by this. You can go forth.
Okay.
And
And then-
if I may, Carol, just to break in for a second, one thing that is really important to understand for the town is that the bylaw actually identifies that 100 feet outside of wetland as a resource area, which opens the door to allow you to write performance standards for work in there. Michael and Carol and I were sort of churning over terminology, and I think that's something we can put aside for a moment, but it's just important to understand that the fact that the bylaw says 100 feet is a jurisdictional area is what allows the commission to write performance standards, as opposed to the way a buffer zone per se is really just an area in which you can consider work and think about it. So that's something that's important moving forward, to understand that it is a resource area.
Well, Matt, why don't I turn over to you? This next section was simply kind of a reminder of the sections within our existing wetland regulations, because we may at some point add or change these. So this was only really thrown into this document. So why don't you Matt, if you can take it from here, I think you just started to talk about this regarding our bylaw.
Yeah, you know, I think that what we are sort of coming around to understanding is thinking about putting metrics around what is being proposed on a particular project site and how the resource areas are functioning, and what tools the bylaw regulations can put in place to allow the commission to really understand the function prior to proposed work, the likely impacts of proposed work, and then to condition work so that your purposes, which are protecting that 100 feet outside of wetlands, are accomplished. So you can see the structure of the regulations obviously wouldn't change. That's sort of the way that these are structured generally, but there are areas that we've been talking about, particularly definitions, being very precise and thoughtful in what terms need to be defined clearly, in addition to what the Wetlands Protection Act regulations definitions are. Being very thoughtful and prescriptive about the burden of proof that an applicant coming before you will have to demonstrate that any work that they're proposing inside that buffer zone, the 100 feet, is, you know, you make the presumption, you make a statement of presumption that that zone is critically important to it has its own ecological functions, but it also is very important to the protection of the adjacent wetlands, and that the presumption is that work in that area is going to result in harm to the adjacent wetland. There are a lot of wetland bylaws. That was actually primarily one of my tasks when we started this a year ago, is finding examples of other bylaws that are set up in the same way. And we've got a few of those that going forward we'll pull from. And then the burden of proof is placed on to the applicant to demonstrate that the work they're proposing, if they are going to propose work inside that 100 feet, it's really on them to demonstrate conclusively to the commission that the work that they're proposing isn't going to have an adverse effect on the wetlands. And that, you know, that sort of plays into your performance standards that ultimately will need to get drafted and thought through. What is it that can be allowed? So if by way of thinking for analogy, you think about the way that the Wetlands Protection Act protects bordering vegetated wetland. You know, it is not absolutely forbidden to touch BVW. There are performance standards, and it says for BVW, the issuing authority, the commission, may allow the alteration of up to 5,000 square feet of bordering vegetated wetland if various conditions are met. And so those are the sorts of things that the commission needs to craft for all of the resource areas that are protected, but specifically fleshing out the protections for the 100-foot zone. And that's really, you know, sort of digging into that and being very, very thoughtful and very as precise as possible in the information that is required of an applicant, and then to the extent that is possible, providing guideposts for the commission on how to evaluate information that's submitted, in order to essentially lead to a decision about whether or not something is allowable or not allowed. So that doesn't track with our document here quite, but that's in more of a broad brush, the big picture of I think what needs to be accomplished overall in the drafting of a set of regulations for the bylaw.
Yep. That's super important and super helpful. Did you want to talk a little bit? I think you've really in many ways summarized what was in this first section. And then if you could, can you talk a little bit about the exemplars from other towns and some of the language? Do you think that might be helpful? Because one of the discussions we had was the idea of a preamble. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit, Matt.
Yeah. Preambles are used in the Wetlands Protection Act regulations to essentially lay out the philosophy behind the regulations. So this is an opportunity to write the rationale behind the commission's regulations. So sort of put up front why it is that the 100-foot zone is so important. Why is that valuable? How does it function? What are the characteristics that are important? All those kinds of things. You lay the groundwork for the set of regulations that flow from that. So that's a good opportunity to kind of like let the regulated public get inside your head to understand why it is these regulations exist, why they're written the way they do. Ultimately, the strength of a body of regulations is going to hinge on the ability to defend them down the road if they're ever challenged. And that's why you really need to have that rationale and as many details and as much specificity as you can in presenting them. So there are a whole bunch of towns. Massachusetts has 351 towns. I think better than half have a home rule bylaw under the wetlands that add protection to the over and above the Wetlands Protection Act. Many of those are really don't have a lot of teeth, don't really go any farther than the Wetlands Protection Act itself. But then there are a lot of examples of towns that go quite a bit farther. In this document are a handful. There are certainly others that are out there that are quite good and strong and have been in place and tested for years, varying amounts of time. But one good example, so we've been back and forth at this discussion about that 100 feet. The my computer was completely not playing well. So I lost a whole bunch of things that were open coming in here. But I have the actual bylaw handy, which looks like it doesn't want to come up. And hopefully this will.
Do you need the bylaw? I could show it if you want it.
I just want to grab this one statement out and just read this one thing. In your in the second paragraph of your bylaw, in chapter 17, no person shall remove, fill, dredge, alter, or build, do any work upon or within 100 feet of any bank, freshwater wetland, beach, marsh, meadow, bog. This statement of at the section 1, paragraph 2 establishes that 100 feet as one of your resource areas. In Arlington, they actually, in addition to swamp, bog, meadow, river, stream, the things that are enumerated, they have what's referred to, what they call the adjacent upland resource area, or AURA. Same thing, it's a 100-foot zone that is measured from a wetland flag or the edge of a jurisdictional wetland out into the upland 100 feet. And that is a jurisdictional resource. And it is materially different than a buffer zone because buffer zones are just areas in which the commission has the discretion to look at the work that's being proposed in a buffer zone, but there isn't there has to be a demonstrated or probable impact in the wetland, in the adjacent wetland. You don't have the same kind of authority to regulate work in buffers that you do in a resource area. So at any rate, Arlington is a good example. That's a body of regulations that is something to pull from. Lexington has a strong protection of buffers. Bellingham has a strong setup. They have a 25-foot no touch, a 50-foot no build, and then 100-foot. How do they do that? How do they do the outer 50? They allow some work in there, but the way that they've structured it and the language they use in their regulations is a good model to look at. Bedford, I'm working in the city of Boston. They have some very strong regulations. There are quite a few. Boxford is another one that has a strict 100-foot no touch setback from a whole bunch of different types of wetlands in town. And they just set it up as a table. And if you're within 100 feet of this wetland, it's not allowed. Work is not allowed. So, there are a lot of different approaches to putting together a body of regulations. But, identifying what the goals are and being very clear about those up front and crafting regulations that support that, and then ultimately that are the fundamental basis on which you're making your decisions, so that your decisions are not arbitrary and they'll hold up on appeals. That's kind of the overall goal of what the commission has to accomplish.
Do people have any questions at this point?
How do you want to proceed? People have questions, or how do we want to proceed? I guess it'd be interesting to look at the Boxford table. I'll have to go dig that up.
Yeah.
I'll send over a copy of it.
Yeah, I have it somewhere myself. I think I remember seeing something there, but yeah.
Is it useful to talk a little bit about the Lincoln regulations in particular? I know there's a bunch of language here, Matt, that I think was there for us to kind of consider. I don't know whether Michael and Courtney, if you think it's a good idea to start talking more specifically about this, or maybe Matt can just kind of give us a flavor of it so we can think about it.
I mean,
Maybe you could talk a little bit about Lincoln, because that's another one that we have quite a bit here.
Yeah, what I pulled a whole bunch of language straight out of their regulations for you to read through and and digest. One thing you'll find when you do start really digging into crafting bylaw language is that there's a lot of borrowing that goes on between towns. The MACC model bylaw is a really good place to start, because that has been, tested and vetted and used and reused, and it's in a lot of different places. So that's a very good resource to be thinking about.
But hold on, before you go,
Mm-hmm.
you say the MACC bylaw, model bylaw, we're basically looking at regulations here. Are there a set of MACC model regulations? Because we're not exploring changing our bylaw at this stage.
Yeah, my understanding, I haven't dug in. That's a good question. I sort of, one of the things that is true is that regulations are shared back and forth and stolen from, and chunks lifted from to suit all the different towns, and so it's more kind of a body of these towns that have shared their resources, so to speak. And I'll have to check on that. There's some new material coming out for climate resiliency. That's a kind of whole nother ball of wax. Yeah.
There's a few sessions. Yes, for those
Say
interested,
again?
there's a few sessions at the MACC conference that I want to go to.
Yeah,
about
Jillian Davies and
Yeah.
Nathaniel Stevens are just publishing a whole bunch of material on climate resiliency provisions for local action, which will be a pretty interesting set of things to dig into.
Before I don't want to go down that road. Carol, are you the one sharing the screen and controlling it?
Yeah, I was
Can you
thinking.
go back up to the Lincoln General
Sure.
Principles?
Yep.
Before we move on, I'd like to make a comment to the rest here. Okay, stop there, and you can scroll up just a hair. What I want to point out here for people to think about, part of what we talked about is this whole preamble, or as Matt is saying, the bases for doing this. In regulations, you don't have to go put all of the evidence, but what's useful to see here, and where the people have a question, is that that what's on the screen now from Lincoln is some of those kind of general conclusions from all of the science that forms the basis for what we're about to do. And it's important for people here on the commission to see whether we're on board with this to some extent, because some of us have looked at this for a while and have been doing this for a while, but that part of what we're that at least previously we were going to embark on before there's less than a quorum of the commission still from that period, is the recognition of some of these kind of general principles here that that wetland resources function better and are critical to have this kind of buffer zone. Now, before we get to or as a kind of a resource area, I don't want to get too hung up on the terminology, but whether people have questions about the idea about this evidence, there's a whole guidebook that the MACC put that establishes a lot of the science and the publications that essentially this 100 feet area, whether you call it a resource area or a buffer zone, is critical to wetland protection. And how much, so that's a fundamental principle that we're sort of building on. Question is as to what extent people need to think about that, because part of what we're embarking on in the next, that's the first phase of this, is that there's a whole handbook, guidebook, and a lot of evidence about the importance of this 100-foot area and how much we need to talk about
Michael,
that.
I have a question on that. You said there's a whole handbook, guidebook, I guess, produced by MACC.
It's in the folder there. It's been in the folder. It's one of
Yeah,
them.
so got it. So is this widely accepted among conservation commissions throughout the state? Maybe this is a question for Matt. Or would this be controversial among various conservation commissions? Do we have any idea?
The underlying science is not controversial. It, you know, I think you can really summarize it by saying that you know, larger buffer zones are more protective of wetlands than smaller buffer zones, right? I mean, that it boils down to that. And the guidebook explores the science on all of the 8 interests of the Act and provides the scientific literature review, essentially, of, you know, the proof behind the buffer zone, the importance of buffer zone to protecting all the different interests of the Wetlands Protection Act. That's
So
not
other
controversial.
so other towns may not have this principle spelled out specifically in their bylaw, but the underlying principles, the underlying principle itself, you know, whether or not, notwithstanding the fact it might not appear in another town's bylaw, the actual substance is not, you know, controversial town to town. And you know, I'm just, that's sort of what I'm curious about, is if another conservation commission could potentially, you know, not agree with this. I'm just curious about that, but it sounds like no. Sounds like no.
Well, being a scientist, you know, I lean toward I lean on the science as the, you know, I guess to answer your question, sure, you know, not everyone believes that the Earth is warming. Not everyone believes the Earth is round. You know, so it can be, yeah, sure, there could be controversy over it, but it's settled science. I mean, it's, you know, it's pretty well understood that buffer zones are important to protecting adjacent wetland resources, and that bigger buffer zones provide greater protection.
I think for me, the other thing that's useful about this, Matt, is that you're pointing out towns that have already, you know, protected the first 100 in a similar way to what we're doing and what we want to kind of reinforce. When you think of towns like, I guess you had mentioned Boxford as an example, and Arlington, so that also on the legal side, it's been tested for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'll say, for example, what I found revealing that I never knew until last week or even this week is that, for example, our town of Dover, that some people like to compare to, they actually have a buffer zone of 150 feet, which I was totally surprised by. For all the times I've looked at stuff over there, I never realized that anybody had a buffer zone of more than 100 feet.
They no longer have a 150-foot buffer zone.
What's that?
They no longer, they don't have a 150-foot buffer zone. They attempted to do that, but had not put that properly in place. It was in place for about 6 months.
I wonder why
But
it's
it's-
still in their regulations then.
It's still online.
Too.
It's not there. It stopped about 6, maybe a year ago.
A week ago, it was still online.
That may
Just-
be, but their
Still on the eye today.
town
That's
council
interesting.
told them that it's no longer in place.
Okay, I was surprised because I've gone to their meetings and I never saw them talk about it other than the 100-foot. I would say also, one thing is that I don't think where we're going in this is so dramatically different than many towns that we're essentially this kind of work, I would say, is that I'm not sure how much different we will come out in the end from what we do now, but we're trying to codify it in a certain way so that it's more precise, it's more clear cut for ourselves and for applicants to understand that, because we've always had this belief, because following this science, which has been around for a long time. But whatever, but Matt, yeah, it's Kurt, it's, I guess, coming back to Kurt. I don't know. Did you want to follow up on that, Kurt?
No, yeah, no, I certainly wasn't questioning the science, and I'll take a look at the guidebook because I haven't looked at that yet. I was just more curious if amongst other conservation commissions, if this would be a hotly debated topic of whether or not to add, such a preamble. But to Carol's point, other towns already have adopted similar, similar language or similar, like the no touch zone and whatnot. And so it has been tested legally, I suppose. So that's kind of where I was going with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've had one that's fairly significant compared to many towns for a long time. Like our no touch 50-foot no alteration has been around for a very long time without any controversy or other than doing the permitting there. I think it's also useful to think about the fact that, right, the science is protecting the interests, that essentially whether it's a wetland or a buffer zone or whatever you want to call them, we're basically just, our law and the state law is about protecting clean water and pollution, that it's those are what they're doing, and the wetlands are a main mechanism to doing that. But yeah, it's coming back to those fundamental interests. But okay, does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
One of the questions, there are sort of general areas that I had was curious about and how other towns have approached this, is how they deal with differences between modifications to existing lots, existing houses versus new construction. So for example, a lot of time it seems that we're looking at septic updates to improve a failed system, and there's really nowhere to put it other than in the buffer zone, or worse, or sometimes it's even formerly undisturbed areas. And how do you make a distinction between that appearing to be a net positive for the wetlands versus something that's brand new, and trying to balance these without too much burden for applicants?
Yeah, I think there's some careful writing that has to be done, because you're right. When you've got a failing septic system, you want that, because that's having a bigger impact than new lawn might on a wetland. So I think that that's where having well done performance standards that allow you to make consideration of the on balance result of a proposed piece of work. And also, we talked earlier today, Michael and Carol and I, about being careful with definitions. And so really sort of making an effort to clearly define what you mean by previously altered and unaltered. And that way you can, rather than being in a situation where you're making decisions case by case and could be viewed as making essentially arbitrary decisions, if you've got these things well thought out and defined and laid out in your regulatory performance standards and so forth, I think you can address those kind of situations. But again, I think you have to approach that carefully and look for exemplars that other towns where obviously, Sherborn isn't the only place where that problem crops up. And so finding other towns that have worked through that and come up with good solutions. That's an important step, I think.
So
Yeah.
we've talked about the preamble. Matt, you haven't really touched on this so much about the burden of proof. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this, and we do have some language here that will help us think it through a little bit.
Yeah. Just making a note here, sorry.
Yeah, no, but while you're doing the note, I guess I just want to be clear to everybody else. I mean, besides Kurt who talked, that whether we can come back to this, but we want to make sure that we're all that we're on relatively the same page about in a sense, accepting that the science of this, that we have a solid basis. We have a solid basis legally and technically, which is what we've been doing. A lot of what we're talking about in this process is somewhat more codification of what we've been doing for the last 10 years that I've been on this. There's not a lot of, there's a few interesting points that can come up about building a new unaltered area. But for the most part, we're basically trying to formalize what I see what we've been already doing for quite a long time. I'll go back, but I just want to make sure nobody else has any immediate questions we can about the science issues. Hearing none, go forth, Matt.
Steve Scrimshaw had his hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, sorry. You guys have to talk. I can't see everybody.
Okay, I was on mute.
You don't have to be polite anymore. Just butt in.
Okay, I think it's pretty clear to me that the 100-foot is a little bit arbitrary, but it's a well-accepted buffer zone, if you will. But something that Jacob and I both attended, that depends on is what you're trying to conserve or protect. So that's so I guess my point is it's a little bit arbitrary, but it's obvious it's what we're working with because the rest of the state's working with that 100-foot. Is that correct?
For the most part.
Okay.
But you're right. It's a good observation. It is arbitrary. And in point of fact, the science would recommend larger than 100-foot, particularly when you start talking about wildlife habitat values, and protecting the wildlife habitat values of wetlands. You start talking about really significant amounts of upland areas. But the 100 feet goes back to the 1980s, and what was politically tenable. I think it was a compromise, as I understand it. So a little bit before my time, but that was something that could get through as opposed to much larger buffers, which might have had incrementally more value to protecting wetlands. So it's a compromise. I'd be interested to understand why the 150-foot. Would you say it was Dover? I wonder why that has failed. I wonder, what they did wrong to make it so they couldn't go after that, because theoretically, you could increase the size of your buffer. There's nothing really stopping that, I don't think.
Joyce, do you know the answer to that by any chance? Why Dover abandoned 150 feet? Did you hear anything?
It went back to town council, and then they brought it to town meeting for a vote, and it was not approved. They did not have it allowed under their bylaw.
So it was really more town meeting, or was it more town council?
It was town council that they sent it back to town meeting.
Because their bylaw reads the same as ours.
I think what happened is they put it in their regulations and didn't have it in the bylaw, similar to a certain vernal pool issue that we had a bit ago.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
I have another question about sort of touching on what Jacob described about new construction or construction in an area that's never been had any construction and well, near a wetland and all the existing things that we have to make exceptions for. Now, how often, this is a new commissioner or whatever, new on here, how often does that, to people building in new construction and a new parcel of land, are they, do they point to say, well, you let that person do this, this and that, and why not me? Do they cross over? I'm not sure if I'm asking this properly, but because we have to deal with so many exemptions, does that affect how we enforce totally new construction and new land and parcels that are undeveloped?
I don't know how you handle it locally, but as an example, the Rivers Protection Act was passed in 1996. The regulations to implement the river component of the Wetlands Protection Act at 1058, it specifies a lot of things that are allowable for instance, lots that were established prior to the date that the regulations were implemented. And then if, anything after that date going forward is subject to those regulations. So there are quite often hard lines that are drawn for activities that are proposed following the date of writing your regs or implementing the regulations. So you can have those kind of hard starts to new provisions that going forward, new proposals are subject to this. And before this law, it was a different set of rules.
Lincoln has that for their, as is in the document on the screen earlier.
Yeah.
Lincoln put that in effect for this issue of new permanent structures.
Yeah.
Yep, it's right
In
here.
the buffer right there. I mean, one could have it for unaltered buffer zone.
Yeah.
For example, Dover has it, I think, as 70 feet as a performance standards in Dover. We have the 50-foot, but we haven't specified, even though we push hard, not to have new structures and unaltered buffer zone. And we do differentiate between, new construction gets dealt with differently because often it's mainly septic stuff that we see here. In town, there's quite a precedent for dealing with existing houses and their septic issues versus new construction. So we could have some of that same kind of differentiation, because, for example, as is put forth here, whether we want to make it a little clearer to protect unaltered buffer zone, for example, probably one of the bigger issues that I see is whether we want to say anything about the idea of on new lots after a certain date with unaltered buffer zone, whether we want to set a setback that's greater than the 50 feet, for example, that we have for no alteration, such as the what I just said is a little easier than, is a little more restrictive than, or limited than what Lincoln even has, but that's something we can talk about as a performance standard. Other people have questions about science or other kind of bigger things before we get down to this burden of proof thing that we were doing there? Don't worry, we could always come back to these topics. I just want to make sure we've got people's thoughts for the moment. Why don't you go on with this? So that's all the preamble and the basis stuff. This burden of proof is beginning to enter into the specifics of what people have to provide in order to do work. And
Yeah,
say
so
it again, and you can go, I'll let you say it, versus my slant. Go on.
no, I was just gonna say, burden of proof statements exist in the Wetlands Protection Act. And essentially it says that, work that is proposed within a resource area is presumed to have an adverse effect. And an applicant needs to prove that, the work they're proposing will not have an adverse effect. And that is in order to get a permit. And in my experience, that is rarely undertaken with any sort of seriousness. And there's no standard by which an applicant needs to measure what they bring to a conservation commission by way of proof. It's just a preponderance of the evidence. And that is quite often just a statement by a wetland professional who says, no, this is going to be fine. There won't be an adverse effect. And it's kind of, you got one expert telling a commission what their opinion is. The opinion is obviously slanted, but there's no objective measure of what proof means. And so put some fair bit of effort into thinking about this component, because I think that your regulations could be pretty prescriptive about what you expect to be brought to you by way of proof that work isn't going to have an adverse effect. So you could say that, if you are proposing work in unaltered buffer zone, the 100 feet, then you need to document the extent of buffer zone that exists on the site and quantify the extent of impact or work that you're proposing. You need to measure the slopes and provide that information to the commission. You need to determine the soil composition, because that has an effect on permeability. If you've got clay deposits, water's going to blast through and kind of sheet flow into your wetland. If you have very loamy soils, you're going to get better percolation, and so less water making it to the wetland, things of that nature. You can sort of set expectations for a report on what the vegetation community and composition is. So essentially, you take this as an opportunity to say, these are the things we expect you to come in here and tell us about and measure and report upon, so that when you tell us what you're intending to do, we as a commission have the basis on which to make decisions. So and then that's where you can really rely on the science that's presented in the buffer zone handbook, to understand, what is the impact of a steeper slope on the determination that a buffer zone, the way a buffer zone functions. What actually is the value of the wetland that is adjacent to this buffer zone that work is proposed in. If you have, as an example, wetland that has, is completely loaded with buckthorn, and, basically has a vegetation that's entirely or mostly invasive plants, that's going to be, you could be less protective of that than if you have a really nice little sphagnum bog that has very little by way of invasive plants, or has a real nice rich diversity of native plants, or whatever. You can kind of, in the burden of proof requirements, establish what it is that you expect to be presented by way of information about the wetlands, information about the buffer zone, and information about the project, so that you can make an objective determination of the likelihood of impacts, rather than just relying on the word of a consultant who says, yeah, it's going to be fine. This won't have any real adverse impact over time. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, I think this is an opportunity to really set the stage for what an applicant needs to bring to the commission when if they are going to be proposing work in that zone that you're trying to protect.
Matt, one of the things I like about this list here is that this really does give us so much more information than we're requiring now. We don't necessarily get a detailed analysis of the wetland itself. This idea of landscape scale integrity, like fragmentation, that's a really important thing for us to know about. We don't usually get that. The percentage of outer buffer zone proposed to be altered. Typically, we're told how many total square feet, but we don't know. Like, okay, is that 10% or is that 50%? That makes a big, big difference in the wetland functioning.
Yep.
So to me, this was so helpful to see this and to, consider that these could be very useful parts of our own burden of proof. We'd have so much more information to act upon.
Yeah. And then if you can work with an applicant with that reporting and get on the same page about what really the functions are, the values that you're protecting in the wetland, and how you're making your decisions. I think it's a useful section to really spend some effort on.
I think this section also helps us with the kinds of questions, for instance, that you asked, Steve, and I think somebody else asked, which is, what about when we're looking at something where it's very much altered or has lots of invasives versus something that's not altered or is mostly native, native vegetation, for instance, that we can think it doesn't have to, we're looking at each situation separately. So it's not like, wow, if we allow this in this kind of situation, then we have to allow it everywhere. We know we have to be really specific to the conditions of the wetlands in each case. Is that correct in how to think about it, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
And I think the summary for the benefit of everybody on the commission, we kind of, from an earlier conversation with Matt, we kind of summarized it here, that the commission needs to understand the characteristics to know how it functions. I don't know if you could maybe just touch briefly on this section. I'd appreciate it, Matt.
Let's see which section that is.
The reference to McGarrigle et al. And it's probably a little bit redundant to what we just said, but you really were referring a little bit more here to the buffer zone handbook. And I guess one question I wanted to ask you is, do other commissions, for instance, in their burden of proof area, would they actually include specific references to, as it is here, specific sections of the buffer zone handbook?
I think you can. I don't know that is regularly done, but it's a published work, and it's got, it's certainly in the canon of Massachusetts wetland protection. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable to make references to that. I don't think there are a lot of sets of regulations that have references like that, citations to published literature. But I don't see the harm in doing that, because it gives someone the opportunity to see what specifically is the basis of what your rule is. I think that this process of requiring thorough evaluations of the resources on a site as it stands, and the work that's being proposed, or the extent of work that is proposed for a site. It gives you the material that you can really use to make an objective decision. And I think that's the important thing, is because as you say, every site is its own beast, and you want to make sure that you're not being arbitrary, and that you're ultimately that over the course of time, that your decision making doesn't appear to have an arbitrariness to it. So the more that you're relying on references and objective measures, I think the stronger your body of work ultimately.
So on the question of whether or not to include references to the handbook in the regulation, I assume so is town council going to review the draft regulation?
Yes.
Or would they review it before we vote on it, or after?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We would have it before we produce any draft that we produce. I think we would try to get them to review it before we have the second hearing.
So they could weigh in on whether or not, because I do think it's a little bit odd to have a reference to.
I don't think we're gonna, I'll venture to say,
but-
I don't think we'll need to do it, because, for example, 3.1.2 is only a page or so. And it just lists a bunch of factors that are useful. So I would say it's unlikely that we'll end up doing that, because I think we can just cut what we want. We can use what we want from it specifically.
Yeah, I mean, as long as town council looks at it, and if they say fine, looks great, but that's just, I would be interested to hear what they
Oh,
have
yeah,
to say.
we would do that. We always do that with the reg changes to make sure that we're not going down a errant path.
Yep.
But I would like to think that we maybe want to avoid that, because I would like it to be a self-sufficient document. But we'll see what that comes down to. But 3.1.2 is that's listed there, is a useful list of some specifics that I think would fit well into a document of itemizing just the kind of stuff we're looking for. So it's clear to all parties. And it's not a very, and it's a fairly specific list that I think is quite workable when people get around to looking at it. I should have included in my other document where I wrote about performance standards. I forgot to include this particular thing. I included the sections just after it, but whatever, I'm coming around. So we'll work that out.
Michael, we've come to the end of this particular document, and I think at least I hope for everybody on the commission that it's been useful to hear Matt's perspective. It certainly has been for me. And I guess the question we can ask ourselves is a couple of things. One is we didn't get to performance standards, and that's an even more detailed and area to address. And I guess, the question we might want to discuss now is kind of like, how do we kind of work our way through the kinds of changes that we want to make? And I know one thing that was considered in the past, and I mentioned this to you today, Michael, separately, is perhaps having Matt work with us in drafting suggested language that the commission can review. And I'd be very interested in how other people feel. It can be a fair amount of work, so it might be helpful to have Matt as our consultant on this.
Do other people want to comment before I do?
I mean, I guess I would comment to say, knowing that it is a fair amount of work, I personally think I would advocate for that approach.
Seems like a good idea. Yeah.
I agree with it, and at what level, the question is to get more specific about that. That whether that to some extent, whether we do it in pieces. As I see that there is this kind of preamble and justification, which a lot of the material is already here. And whether, and it's stuff a lot from Matt, and it's that whether that's one chunk that I would hopefully wouldn't be a very large task. But Matt will have to think about it, get back to us, but that I think, and how long we even want it, and whether we're not presenting, we're presenting some basis. But as it akin to the Lincoln thing and others, it's only some, whatever, a page or so in other documents, and whether to you, Matt, whether to organize it a little better where you can have some levels of detail, but just give us a few examples of some level of detail from the others that maybe brings in what you did with the guidebook. That would give a good solid basis for the people reading it, that this is our rationale. That, I guess, I don't know whether that's where you might make some references to things, but maybe I would, whether that's where maybe a few quote unquote footnotes or something, or references might be the most appropriate. So that if people, because we're not going to present all of the science, we just want to present some cursory summary of it, and the fact that we have a legal and technical basis for doing what we're about to do, what we in the next sections, and that would go in our section 5, which is where we have performance standards, and so I could see that being a clear task that shouldn't be too onerous, and maybe you could see what levels are there that would be helpful and to your comparative advantage. As to the
Michael,
what?
can I ask, can I clarify? It sounds like what we would be asking Matt to do is essentially look at our existing regulations and propose language for the preamble and for burden of proof as well.
I was going to get into the burden of proof thing. That I'm just starting with the preamble.
Okay.
The burden of proof is how much we need that, or whether it's, I guess we have the burden of proof language. The question is whether you say burden of proof, I just want to be clear. It's basically whether it's less the burden of proof than specifying what information is is
Yes, that's
So
probably
what
what I
would call
meant.
it. So, okay, that's what I
And,
want to be
and the
clear
same
about.
with definitions to, yeah, in other words, we're adding a preamble and then
Then we're going-
providing recommendations regarding definitions and burden of proof, which are the two other things that Matt touched on
Well,
today.
those are two small little things, the definitions. And we're gonna have to come to whether there's some definitions, but I'd still separate. I think we have burden of proof language. It's just a matter of that we're staying like we do for like we do have it for you can look at what we have for the inner buffer zone, where essentially we say, it's very simple. We just say the burden of proof is on the applicant. But basically then we move into, we're trying to define what it is that the information you have to provide for us to make a decision or for us to go against, that there isn't going to be an issue. And it's that information, I call that like information requests, or I'm trying to think of the term we actually use for other things, but it's the information requirements that we're looking for, that I'd like to call that. It's not a burden of proof. It's basically what we would ask for people to respond to, where akin to that 3.1.2 that's mentioned there, where it says that, and some of the other things about area of change. What percentage change, what's the average buffer zone, what's the average vegetated buffer zone?
So
What's the
basically,
minimum buffer zone?
revising the section titled burden of proof. Is that what you're saying?
No, I would say we don't do it with the way we do it now under 5. God, why do I just have it here? The way we have it now is that all we have to say is, here's what we need to have in order to overcome the presumption that it's going to be cause that these alterations will cause a problem. That the burden, we already established that the burden of proof is on the applicant. We then just have to say what it is we need to get from you in order to possibly overcome that presumption, if you want to do something. That's my view of the logic here, so that it's really it's the kind of information that needs to be provided. It's not a definitional question. It's what we need to provide with some level of specificity other than the generalities, like Matt said, of like, just show us that it won't make a difference. We want to be more clear cut about, we want this kind of data, like in the, and.
Right. So right now, Michael, the our section 3 burden of proof just simply says, has the burden of proving by a preponderance of credible evidence, whereas what Matt showed us was a whole list that was more specific. So I think we're saying the same thing, that we want Matt to look at our section 3 burden of proof and suggest additionally what specific information we would like
Yes,
provided.
but that's what we do under the performance standards. That's what we do already under performance standards. That's what I'm saying, is that it's not clear that we need to change 3. It basically comes down to under 5, where we have performance standards. What we have is, that's where we start saying what it is that we need to learn about in order to overcome a presumption, and what's the kind of evidence that'll help them do it. So,
Well, except
we
when
could-
I'm looking at that right now, it doesn't have the kind of information in like, for instance, in 5.2, it doesn't actually request the kind of information that Matt was mentioning. It doesn't request things like the percentage of buffer. Where
I
is that
understand.
someplace
No,
else? I don't
that's
see
what
it.
I would think. No, that's stuff that, yes, that's, I think, I guess Matt can respond, but I would say that question is, I think that we would want to have what information is needed as part of our section 5 under performance standards versus under section 3. That section 3 is, and maybe you can comment on that, Matt, that having a simple statement of where the burden of proof lies is there, but how to overcome that, maybe it needs to be expanded. But we say in 3, basically the commission accepts and approves such evidence limited to overcoming the presumptions set forth in section 5 that are current. I guess I'll make it I'll ask Matt to put on your list, or maybe is to say, do we need to do something in 3 before that, before we go into what basically we go in 5?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it might,
We could maybe need more there.
maybe, but it could be by reference to section 5, and we're gonna spell out exactly what information you expect there, and yeah, so
That's what we
I
do
think
now, right? Yeah,
yeah, we just have to think that through.
yeah. So there might be a little bit, I would envision maybe a little bit of extra wording in 3, but I think
Yeah.
the majority of it is going to be in 5, around what it is we're looking for. And this draft of what kind of information people need to provide us. Because, right, I find some of the descriptions too general, like even what we had in your text. If you went back to where all that information about, I just want to see that we get specific about what we request.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, Michael, I would say, I think that it should be much more specific in section 3. I think that they're separate ideas, really, and I really liked what Matt said before about being specific and the examples he gave from another town. I don't think it's overkill. I think it's specific and clear to an applicant.
Like what, I think if you pulled up what you had before.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. Well, the other thing is I don't know that we need to, that we have time or even need to go through it. You know, my thought was that essentially Matt could make recommendations, you know, go back and be thoughtful about it, because we're kind of backing into the discussion a little bit here. But the things that are not in performance standards, but were in this document were, hang on,
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
no, I think our performance standards needs to be strengthened, even what we did for the no alterations on.
But this, I mean, now many applicants will provide, you know, an analysis of the buffer zone, but they don't necessarily provide a detailed analysis of the wetland. Fragmentation, seldom. This we usually hear of existing alteration, but we seldom hear about this, calculating the percentage. And we hear kind of a rough description of soil texture.
No, we
Not
could be much more
not usually
specific about that.
permeability or roughness. So this is all information that we're not getting because we're not requesting it, because it's not part of the burden of proof right now in our regulations.
One
One
thing
thing-
that strikes me is there are a lot. I'm trying to think of a town where this I've come up against this. Boxford might be one, where they just give for your submission to be accepted by the commission to consider. Your plans have to be no more than 40 scale. They have to show X, Y, and Z. You know, they just are very prescriptive about what you need to provide to the commission in order to be considered a complete application.
Right.
That
we
might
have that.
actually be an approach.
We have that.
You do?
Yes,
Okay.
it's in the application section below, it's section 7, as well as there's an attachment of, there's 4 pages, there's a whole table.
Oh, okay.
At the end of our regs, which lists a whole bunch of things that are wanted. And it's also listed in section 7, I believe.
Maybe that's where we need to update it then.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. I mean, let's put it this way. I don't want to spend more on it now. We just have to figure out where we're putting this stuff.
Right.
I'm only arguing that that's the burden of proof section is probably not where we want to put all the detail, as opposed to making the forward reference to 5 or 7 as to what's needed, given our structure. That's all I'm saying. I think we're not disagreeing on that we need to do stuff, but right, I just want to be specific about when we look at the thing that's on the screen about a detailed analysis of the wetland. To me, that's like, yeah, what's all the things that go into that? I want to know specifically what that means, that's useful for us to do it. It's like, is it a vernal pool? Is it an area of critical environment? Some of the things that are in the buffer zone handbook, where there are some characteristics about the wetland itself that could be asked for And the question is to what extent, I don't want to, I mean, we don't know what this is. This is, and at what point we ask for it, whether it's required up front or it's required when people want to do something. Because it could be a burden, but I just want to think of whether there's some things here that we might regularly want, and then ones that people would have to provide us if they want to go against, if they want to overcome the presumption of impact. So I'd like to be clear about that difference. And question is going forward whether, say at the preamble, whether it's useful to go through these, or to what extent is it going to be useful for us before we make Matt do things? The question is, some of the things that are listed here, many of the things that are on the screen here are in the other thing, number 2, that I had written a year ago almost about these kind of factors. And then there's a little bit more in the handbook, let's just 3.1.2 that I'm referencing, that he references. Whether before we ask Matt to do things on that part, whether at our next meeting, we do our own walkthrough for our own education and thinking through all of that. And that would maybe help us do it, and to what extent we do that together with Matt coming in for another hour then, and we walk through all of those things so we could see what are things that we can actually want to ask for, what are things we could turn into a performance standard, that where we actually say we want something if it's greater than 15% versus we want to know about the soils. Part of me is like, performance standard is, you can't do this if all the soils are clay, then whether that's a standard you can make or not. But maybe for the next meeting, we walk through these sort of mixture of information requests / factors that could go into a performance standard that would go to drafting that. And that would be something educational for all of us to do together with Matt. Is my suggestion.
I think that's fine. I did want to mention to you, Matt, Appendix D does have, it's what worksheets of information to be shown on site plans. And it is not as detailed as what we have here in front of us for burden of proof. So.
Right. We have to figure out what we want to start with sticking in there. Once we go through all of this, we have to make a decision what goes in there versus what people have to present if they want to do more.
Yeah.
That we don't burden applicants with things that are not relevant or not needed.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So Michael, you're suggesting that in the next hearing that we just go on to continue the discussion, but the next focus is performance standards. So we kind of have gone through everything. We can start to think about where any changes belong. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm suggesting we go through what specific kind of information requests we would make, that what goes into these things here that are specific, and thinking about which ones could be turned into performance standards, and which ones don't, are not amenable to them. And I would suggest, even, I could see if I have time, but I think that throwing some of the stuff, I'll try to do it since we have a little more time. I will take a little bit more of what's in this document that we've been looking at today and throw it in front of the doc and sort of meld it into what I did before. Because what I did before, it takes out literally, and we could walk through sections of the guidebook there. So I actually went through 3.1.3 and 0.4 and said, okay, covered above, not covered. Do we want to cover it, not cover it? Those are all the practical findings, I think, of the guidebook. And so we could walk through each of those as a group and see, but I'll try to meld some of the stuff from this document into my number 2 document that everybody sees. And
so in the
meantime,
one area where I think Matt could make some progress, though, would be proposing language for a preamble, because to me, that does feel like it's a different level
Sure.
of.
No, I agree. No, that's a matter of what timing he has to do that, and to think maybe a little bit about if he has time, then the burden of proof kind of section where we parse up what we leave there versus what we're going to put in other places. I don't mind that. You can work on that and see what you can get done in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But we have certainly, even if you didn't do anything, we have a simple task that's of some, would be lots, I think will be interesting
Yeah.
to do at our next meeting. And you can comment to me about, if you have a look at my document number 2, whether you feel like that's a reasonable starting point
Okay.
for some of this.
Okay.
Michael, do we need a motion for this? I mean, one thing, Matt, I think you need to let us know, your consulting fees for this, but,
We already have an existing contract.
okay,
Yeah, we've got a little bit of budget left in that. We got, I don't have know what's left exactly, but we'll run through that and what's left fairly quickly, but we can, I think we can get some of this work done under what we've got, and then
Right, you'll have to let us know when it's as a consultant process.
yeah,
Let us know when we're getting close, and so that we have to do an amended, some sort
Sure.
of a change order.
Yeah.
That we would then could go get formalized.
okay, so it sounds like we don't have to make a motion because we already have a contract with you, Matt, so that's good. Hopefully it's fairly clear to you what we'd like you to do next.
yeah.
And we can send you a recording. Oh, no, okay. Question is, so I'm gonna move that we continue this hearing till March 9th at, let's see, do you think we're gonna get through 0 Maple Street in a half an hour? I guess the only thing is, I guess since this is a hearing that we could always open and close if we don't finish it, do you think, should I take the risk that we're gonna get through? I somehow feel like we're half an hour. I don't know, it depends how good it is. We can move it to 8:30, and worst comes to worst, if the hearing before at 8 o'clock runs on.
My
We'll just-
availability on the 9th, unfortunately, is not good.
Oh, okay, that's a good question. I forgot to ask.
That makes any difference.
What do you have any availability?
The 9th, I've got a conflict on the 9th. I've got, I won't be available in the evening.
Oh, at all, okay.
Yeah.
Question is whether we would find it useful ourselves to just sort of make it a shorter little thing, but just to go through and out loud, walk through some of these things. Whether that would just force us to look at it, or whether everybody reads everything anyway. And we just sort of walk through that, what might be information requests and standards. Whether-
Michael, my suggestion would be to do a talk through for 2 reasons.
To do what?
I think it's a good idea to walk through it in the meeting, and there's 2 reasons for that. It gives
You
the
don't have
public.
to say anymore since it's late and we have a lot more of agenda left.
Okay,
No more
I think
needs
it
to be
helps us think
said.
it
Well,
through.
I'm gonna move it to 8:30. We could always extend, if we don't finish the hearing before, we could always open it later. What's your availability on the 23rd?
Should be good.
Should be.
Yeah, let me see here. March 23rd, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep,
Okay, block out something there. I'm not sure when our hearings and this and that and the other, but
all right.
let me know as you get things, let us know.
Yep,
So we can make sure we have the time. Okay,
sounds good.
I move to continue this hearing till 8:30 on March 9th.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Michael, I. Carol,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
Kurt and Courtney,
I
Steve,
Right?
Matt,
Aye.
Jacob,
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Okay, thank you. It's good to
I've got
see
a
you
little bit
all.
of work. Yes, nice to see you. Okay,
care.
moving on. I am
Well-
going back to, we got to get through some stuff here. I'm going back to the, let's get back to this annual report. Where's my share screen thing here?
Michael, can I raise my hand and say one quick thing?
I guess you can try. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know that we're getting late, and so I just want to make sure that I get 5 minutes to share the feedback about the zoning bylaw change
We're
since,
covering the whole agenda. We're
Well,
not-
okay.
We're not cutting anything out of the agenda. I'm just trying to move through it.
I just want to say that before
It's unnecessary.
people start to disappear.
Well, that's a different issue. Okay, here. I guess we have to write something that a tree policy has been developed. I'm just going to put in a few notes here to facilitate ease somehow cutting of harm trees. Harmful trees, blah, blah, blah. Because I'm gonna, in the end, make a motion that that we agree with this and that myself and Courtney and Joyce can finalize some of the wording here. So that'll get added. Something from that thing will be added. Master plans. Okay, I'm okay there, Steph. Anybody have any other questions about the end of this? I need people to say something as opposed to silence. I can't tell the difference between not finishing and not having any comments.
Your proposal looks fine.
Okay, and Jacob is speaking for everybody. Thank you.
I think it looks good, yeah. Where does it, I'm just curious, where does this get published?
Oh, geez, here's your town education civics. Every year, every town is required to produce an annual report, which is a document that used to be mailed out to every single resident. It's about, it has in it all the annual reports of little summaries like this of every single department and board in town, as well as it has the results of town meeting. Has all the warrant articles and everything else, has the salaries and the budgets of everybody in town in it, and it's no longer being mailed out. It is now, you get a postcard in the mail saying that it's available on the town website, as well as you can order a hard copy if you'd like. So this is goes on, and I think that this draft of this part of the annual report is one of the first articles of town meeting that gets voted on to accept, I think this, if I remember right. I'm not 100% sure. But that's where this goes. It doesn't get, it could, on one hand, it used to have a tremendous audience. Now it's unclear how many people see it because of that option to just, that it's no longer sent out. I don't know how many people actually read it. We can try to, what I would say, the only other thorny thing here was this thing about the RDAs. You can rely that somehow we will try to clean it up a little bit, or worst case, it's left confusing. Whether people will trust Courtney and I and Joyce to clean this up to some extent.
Keeping in mind, of course, this is what you approved last year.
That's okay. We're always looking for improvements.
Gotcha.
Precedent or past stuff does not hold much credence to me, other than the fact that nobody complained about it last time. Let's put it that way. Nobody called up being confused about what our regulatory process is. So this language did not cause any adverse impacts on our performance. Okay, I move that we accept the annual report as edited and allowing Michael and Courtney and Joyce to finalize a few changes for clarity.
Seconded.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Roll
Is there
call vote.
one- No,
Whoops.
further discussion, I just minor point, I think my first name is misspelled, I don't care. And did list all of us somewhere? Stephen with a V, I don't really care, but someone else might.
So, yeah, okay, we won't ask who might. Would you like to be Stephen or Steve?
Stephen, I guess that's my formal name.
Okay, nice to meet you, Stephen. Okay. Okay, anybody else's name is spelled? But, yes, we have some problems on another committee I'm on where somebody has a complicated name or two and you can't believe how many misspellings go in our minutes. Okay, thank you. Correction taken. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Michael, I, Carol,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
thank you. Steve,
Aye.
Jacob,
Aye.
Matt,
I,
Courtney,
I'm gonna abstain because I don't want to look at it anymore.
you're not allowed to abstain since you have to help. Okay, abstain. Okay, we really gonna have a 6-0-1 vote? Okay, always gotta have something a little different.
But
Okay,
you gotta make sure it's, the minutes are exciting.
okay, fine. One more thing we have to check in the minutes to get it right. Okay, we've got this. Going back to the agenda, do we have any site issues? I want to make sure that any issues that we need to deal with?
No site issues that we need to deal with today. They'll be on the next agenda.
Okay, I'm just pulling up the agenda to make sure we don't miss anything here. Blah, 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 blah. Minutes we don't have. We're gonna have to catch up on that. Is there a warrant that we had, Deborah? Whoops.
She says no.
Okay, fine. My screen somehow, I'm not sure why everybody isn't showing up here. Okay, now I can see it all. Okay, the annual report we covered, fiscal year 24 budget. I guess the only comment is we're gonna probably, we might have to work with them and we'll deal with it next time. We might have to work with advisory about how we actually word it as a range or something like that. The new agent administrator hire. We did have an interesting applicant, but in the process of setting up to talk to him, he took another job. Hopefully we'll find out what that was and what it was like and stuff like that. So we're still working on that and looking at some other options. I'll leave it as that there. Site issues we've already dealt with. Administrative approvals, are there none?
There are. Oh my God, I forgot. I did too. All right, let me get them.
Okay, do you want me to get it here? If where is it here?
I like just did them yesterday.
Yes, I'm trying to think of whether I could see
One of them
it.
is 20 Morse.
Yes,
Yeah,
Well,
that was for soil testing.
Mhm.
and it was
And one
added-
more soil testing oriented one.
Yeah, 60 Brush Hill.
Hmm.
Yes, that was also soil testing outside of jurisdiction.
both of them are outside of jurisdiction. Okay,
Right, and there was a 263 Western Ave. That was outside
that-
jurisdiction. That was addition.
okay. Okay, so we have 3 of them for the record. Okay. Okay, we've gone through everything except for now, let's talk about the, there's a as a little background to people. The is, I guess, what's called the Dover Amendment. Maybe you lawyers might have heard of it, but I guess it's something that people can do certain things by right. Previously, the whole issue of having large-scale ground-mounted solar systems, there was some issue of whether they need a special use permits, or it's a use change and things like that, to what extent they would be subjected to more permitting issues from the planning board. They would always have to come to us as a wetland regulations still prevail. But there was now some concern that maybe a lot of it could just happen without having to go through some of the permitting and review of the planning board. So that there has been a model bylaw or a standard bylaw that is being circulated that I guess we could send out to people, or people can go look at. It's got to be on the town website, which was basically trying to provide some regulations around the fact that even though you can do these things, that you have to meet certain requirements about how you do it, like what's the setback. You can't just do it right up to the minimum property line. For example, the bylaw there has a setback of, I believe, 200 feet, so that neighbors are not subjected to these fields right next to their house, with the sort of standard 60 foot, I think, is the side setback, I think, for a lot of buildings and things. And there's certain kind of fencing things for safety. So there's a whole list of sort of practical things to make these, that if these projects want to go forth, to make them safer and more amenable to the neighborhood and their neighbors and things like that. You can look at all of those in the copy of it there. There is the problem that came up of whether they even want to cut down trees. Now, there is an issue of no matter what these projects are, they still have to come before the commission under the Wetlands Protection Act. So the issue of, but they do have something called an overlay district, where somehow I can't know what regulations of all these other things that allow them to do it without being subject to various planning board rules and regs that are in the bylaw, in these overlay, what's called an overlay district, which includes, I think, essentially the transfer station maybe, and then underneath the power lines on that are sort of parallel to Western Ave. And in a preface to what that, and there also is some issues that would come up for us anyway, but right now they can just go in and cut down acres of trees, not being in our wetland. If they're not in our wetland jurisdiction, there's no review of that. There is some attempt in there that I'm trying to think of what better wording there could be, was something that I was doing separate from conservation.
Michael, I appreciate you trying to give the overview of the entire solar thing, but can we just limit it to the one thing that Carol wants to bring
Well,
up?
I was getting to the fact that it still has to be under the wetlands and the overlay district, is that preference.
Yeah,
But they,
so,
just so people know, but go on.
no, I think it is helpful to note that this proposed bylaw change is kind of wide ranging. But the part that I was focused on, and I think that I want to make sure that we pay attention to as a commission, is that it would create a major expansion of the solar overlay district, because currently the overlay district is just really, from my understanding, is just where the old landfill was at the town dump. And let me, if I can share my screen, it'll probably be helpful.
I guess it
think
is the
you have to
last item.
stop, Michael, you have to stop sharing. Because I do have the map. I hope you can see this because I don't know, my screen is doing that night shift thing that makes it kind of hard, but let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I think the thing to know is that it's kind of hard to see, but if you can see my cursor, the overlay district is shown in yellow on this proposed zoning map, which you can find on the planning board site. It goes along the northern, it's all of these utility lines along the northern and western side of the town. And I looked it on Oliver and measured it. It's more than 4 miles. So it's a lot of land. Now, the thing about it is that I'm not sure why the legal reasons or regulatory reasons were that the planning board wanted to do this, but the reason I got concerned and wanted to make sure that the Conservation Commission paid attention to this is of the conservation values of those lands. Okay, so I wrote a letter that I'm going to send from myself in any case, along with some other citizens, because I just found about it recently. I wanted to get in time for their next meeting. The proposed changes would create a solar overlay district along this habitat corridor that's nearly 4 miles long. So DOER at the state level has produced a model zoning bylaw to assist communities with zoning on solar arrays. Probably that's what
we
planning
have.
board was working from. One thing to be aware of is it says DOER strongly discourages locations that result in significant loss of land and natural resources. Mass Audubon agrees with this. They encourage that communities adopt zoning to appropriate locations, take into account local natural resources. They mentioned the value of open lands for grassland and shrubland dependent wildlife, many of which are declining in Massachusetts and of high conservation concern. This is where I wanted to make sure the planning board understood that although the land under power lines may kind of appear to be vacant or disturbed or worthless, these are actually very stable plant and animal communities that have been maintained as shrub habitat for utilities for decades. Now they come back to us every, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, and they say, we're going to do this brush hogging. If you happen to be a kind of botany oriented person like me, one of the things that's fascinating about the power lines is they're just a huge amount of native plants and pretty low with invasives. But the interesting thing about it is that it's this shrub habitat that has been remarked on both by Eversource, by Mass Audubon, by many credible people, that this is a kind of habitat that's shrinking and disappearing, and with it, the species that relate to it. So one of my biggest concern is that by opening up these lands to solar farms, the town will actually be disturbing and degrading nearly 4 miles of important habitat. I did talk to Ted Elliman, and this is his exact quote. He said, Barber's power line corridor spans both wet and dry habitats. It's the most botanically rich and diverse place I've seen in Sherborn. I found a large population of the watch-listed rough-leaved aster, many other uncommon native plants, birdfoot violet, and so on. I bring groups from native plant trusts for botanical studies there because it's a really special place, a remarkable diverse plant community. Now, he has focused on the inventories behind the Barber, but that doesn't mean that it stops at the Barber because it's one long continuous habitat. He pointed out that it includes wetlands and borders vernal pools. If you walk through there, I walk up from Brook Street because I live near Brook Street with my husband. All along these corridors are these acres and acres of wild blueberries, huckleberries, hazelnuts, and other shrubs that sustain local songbirds. I know that on the corridor behind the Barber, prairie warblers come and they nest every year. And the brush hogging keeps that shrub habitat. And I looked up prairie warblers in the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. They're considered a Tier 1 conservation priority by Partners in Flight, a watch list species by National Audubon Society. And they specifically say managing utility rights of way has enormous potential for increasing habitat availability for shrubland birds. Capitalizing on these already existing and essentially permanent shrublands should be encouraged whenever possible. So I felt so urgent about this tonight, and in general, that I sat down to write this letter. I have also reached out to Alyssa Landry at Mass Audubon because they have conducted walks under power lines in Sherborn along these corridors. I think many of us know they're also corridors for wildlife. For a long time, I've heard about black bears up under the power line corridor near Brush Hill Road. And in addition to their habitat value, many Sherborn residents use them to bike, hike, run. Somebody mentioned to me a lot of people ride their horses because they're very well-defined trails often through there, watch birds, observe nature. And, you know, designating them for solar zoning, putting solar arrays, they're surrounded by fencing. Not only does it block wildlife corridors, but of course it reduces these recreational opportunities. So the point of my letter, and I would hope that the commission will also consider, I mean, the planning board on the 30th evidently sent this to us for our response, which we haven't responded. I'm happy to share this letter with the commission as kind of a basis to, you know, think about the habitat values, but I think it is a really good idea for the commission to have its own separate statement about this. I think it's essentially, I see it as an opportunity to alert the planning board that while everything else in that bylaw could be great, the designation of these corridors for solar is a bad trade-off. What all of the recommendations are, and including the model bylaw that I mentioned up above, is that we target areas for large-scale solar, such as rooftops, locations in industrial and commercial districts, on vacant or disturbed land. And I think that probably the planning board thought, oh, this is vacant or disturbed land. You know, this is exactly what it is, but they're not correct about that. In the case of Sherborn, you know, my final suggestion is we could encourage solar installations over parking lots at town buildings, parking lots at sports fields. Obviously, the landfill at the transfer station is a good idea, but that it's not a good idea to encourage solar siting on those corridors that are so rich habitats. So that's what I wanted to share with the commission, and I'm very interested in people's questions or, you know, comments about this.
Yeah, I've been back there. The area behind Barbara where the power lines are is pretty cool. So the planning board is doing this because the current solar overlay district is not legally defensible, and that in other municipalities are losing lawsuits for restricting solar development activity too much. So the idea is we need to regulate where the solar is going to go into town, but we can't have the area be so small as to make it impossible for people to have developed ground-mounted solar. And as you've seen, like, you know, there's proposals for like that property on Maple Street with how many acres of forest to clear cut and install huge ground-mounted solar. So we don't have a large amount of industrial land or commercial space. Like town government has already, I mean, Michael's been heavily involved in things like the transfer station and the fire department. It's I guess designating it as a part of this solar overlay district does not necessarily mean that the whole thing is going to become solar. And I can't imagine that all the areas under the power lines are as valuable as, equally as valuable. I'm sure there's value to it, but I mean, I think we also take into consideration that the power companies have broad powers to do what they want in those areas, including, I believe they spray chemicals and stuff routinely. It's not just brush hogging.
Can you even put solar arrays under power lines? I've never seen that. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but I mean, is this even, talk about being legally defensible? Is this even gonna
Oh,
like?
well, I would assume, I would hope that they've looked into this because, they see what's happening in other towns, and maybe it's not directly under the power lines, maybe it's adjacent to the power lines. I don't know for sure, but that's a good question if you want to go to the hearing and ask them about that.
Yeah, I brought
did
it.
read something that said that can actually cause interference, but it didn't come from the utility, so I don't know. I think my concern about this, though, is it kind of designates this as an area. I think from a point of view of habitat value, actually some of the hay fields in town or mowed lawns in town have lower habitat value than the utility corridors. I think that, my concern with it is simply by designating it, it increases the likelihood that they will become solar farms. And it from the habitat perspective, it doesn't make sense.
Well, not only that, Carol, from a solar perspective, it might make more sense to put them in some of those fields you were just describing, because not only under power lines, you're dealing with the power line infrastructure, you're also dealing with presumably, tall trees on either side of the power line corridor. So in terms of the actual exposure, the sun exposure, I mean, I get why the planning board needs to do this. I just am questioning how, I mean, it's not a question for us, it's a question for them.
Exactly.
But-
Well, I mean, it's also, if you look at the state's priorities for places to put solar, I mean, it's like Carol says, parking lots, rooftops, yada, yada. But they want to protect agricultural land. There's not a ton of great agricultural land. So it's kind of like another priority that they don't want to put that on if there are other options. Just like they don't want to cut down pristine forest for it. But I guess, I think this is really interesting and I plan to go to the hearing, but I don't feel like I would send a letter from the Conservation Commission to comment on it per se.
I'd say, the difference between, basically the overlay, I guess I'd have to find out whether the overlay really needs to be there. Your point, Courtney, that it wasn't legal, I'm not quite so sure about that whether we really need to have a very large overlay district. I'd like to clarify whether when we set up the transfer station, that was part of becoming a green community. And we had certain issues there where we had to have something. The question of whether we need to show much of an overlay is probably a legal gray area. And I guess we have to get that clarified, because the bottom line is, the most we would say is, and I would consider it as a Conservation Commission, that since part of our issues are open space and habitat and diverse biodiversity, is that that putting this area as part of the overlay, we'd suggest not doing it unless it's part of this difficult deal of that we need to show something in an overlay that's of some greater area. But I'd like to get that clarified first, and whether there are other places we could do. In the end, even if it's not in an overlay area, that area under the right, it's unclear, as it was unclear to me. I raised the question with our planner as Kurt did. So can they even put solar underneath power lines? Seems like a question of whether this is kind of like a silly thing to put, so sort of just throwing in something that, but I assume it might have some value if they figured it out. But in the end, the difference between it being in an overlay and not in the overlay is that you do have more of the rules. They can still do ground mounted solar there. If it's not we don't have a wetland issue or a buffer zone issue, they can still do it. They just have more setbacks. And they have that you can only cover 50% of the area. And so they're subjected to a lot more rules, which might make it impractical since, for example, we're not going to do it to the extent that we have town land underneath it and we like the habitat. We're not going to let the Barber Reservation be part of it. There are some parts of that that are private land, and that's where people might want to do something. And so whatever, I guess I'd put it on the agenda for our next meeting to think about and to learn more about why they need to have this in the overlay, because given its habitat values. So I would like to, let's pick it up again and see if we learn more about whether it's even practical there and whether this is to what extent this is being driven by some other considerations.
I think those are really good questions.
So I would put it on the next agenda. We could revisit. Steve?
I don't want to continue the topic a long time or anything. It's going to be on agenda, but I just want to be supportive of Carol because I think all those points are very good. And I suspect there are a lot of people in the planning commission board that aren't aware of those considerations. And it is a pretty unique habitat. And some consideration, I think, is warranted for them. And just someone else mentioned about the fields. The fields are number of the fields that the town maintains are mowed multiple times a year, and that actually reduces diversity. And that may be something we should consider at some point.
Yeah, we're trying to cut back. We've cut back on that. There's almost not. I don't think any of the fields now are mowed more than once after the bird season. I think.
Are you talking about conservation lands, Michael?
Oh, conservation lands. Oh, yeah, the other fields, right? If there are other fields, that's a different.
Yeah, there are other considerations for those fields. That, when we went to Hidden Meadow, one of the considerations is it's hard to see the rocks and things like that, and they want to get rid of the invasive and other considerations that might take multiple mowings, but eventually may not be needed. And I think it's maybe a field by field consideration or part of a field by field. Anyways, I think it's at least worthy of discussion.
Oh, yeah, no, but in terms of your other point about mowing, that's something to bring up with you should go visit the land management committee when they do it, just to see whether there's some maybe modifications we want to make based on that habitat issue. So I highly recommend you going there when they talk about it, or Carol, you can invite them if at some point.
Michael, the other question I had, I think you're bringing up some really good questions about land ownership, because I mean, I know a lot of the land under the power lines also is individually owned, right? So it's a real patchwork of land. So again, I would ask that same question. Why did the planning board feel it was necessary to designate quite a large swath of land, and that has probably all sorts of property ownership issues? I don't know.
We'll have to find out what the issue is about defining an overlay, and then we can see what makes sense of whether there's other things. Because this ground mount stuff is complicated for people's, especially when they're cutting forests. But on the other hand, we do need to have more solar. And so, or more renewable based to deal with our other crises. So but I'd like to think there's enough other places for doing this kind of stuff. Okay, so we'll put it on our next meeting agenda as a discussion item. And we'll hopefully all learn more from again, it's on the 21st, Tuesday night, for the planning board. And it's going to be a Zoom meeting. So it's not going to, they do some in person, but it's going to be a Zoom meeting in this case to get more participation. On that note, is there anything we've missed? Okay, Fine, I move to adjourn the meeting at 10:35.
Second,
Okay, any further discussion? Nope, roll call vote. Kurt?
Hi, am I off mute?
Nope, you're fine.
Okay.
Good work. Just late
Aye.
at night, we have to check.
I was trying to find the mute button. Hi.
Michael, I. Jacob,
Hi.
Carol,
I.
Courtney,
I.
Steve.
Aye.
And Matt.
I.
Okay, everybody, we're through for the night.
That-